go. All right. I'll call this City of Delafield Economic Development Focus Group meeting to order, and we'll begin with roll call.
Roll call. Alderperson Jackie Valdy.
Right here.
Plan Commissioner Bob Weiler.
Here.
Jonathan Kemen.
Here.
John Seatman.
Here.
Jerry Holton.
Here.
Ken Beckman.
Here.
David Simon.
Here.
Scott Cranky.
Here.
Craig Reinders.
Here.
Excellent. Can I entertain a motion to approve the minutes from the May 25th meeting?
So moved.
We have
I'll
a
second.
motion and a second. So the motion was from
Beckman. Weiler
second
seconded.
from Weiler. Any additions or corrections? Hearing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. All right, now we will open it up for public comments. Please keep your comments to a maximum of 3 minutes. Mary?
Good evening. My name is Mary Daniel, and I live at 309 Wisconsin Avenue here in Delafield. And if you'd be so kind as to pass these pictures down and around. These are pictures of downtown Delafield from the 1920s, 1960, 1976, and 1985. These pictures are part of the Delafield History Center at Hawksand's Photo Archive Library of Delafield. The interstate had been completed in the early 1960s, and the intersection at Highway 83 and I-94 on the south side was being developed. Delafield has 2 interstate exits, and this helped form 2 different business districts. In 1960, the Hawksand, which was built in 1846, was on the corner of Genesee and Main, and was moved to its current location on Well Street. A gas station was built on the site, and gasoline was 58 cents a gallon in 1976. A downtown development plan was done in 1991 and approved by the Common Council in 1993. It is worth reading. The cover looks like this. It's on the website. So please take some time to read it. It says that the old mill, which was built in 1841 on Mill Street, featured in the line drawing on the cover, was the key factor in lakefront, in quotes, development, and should be included in the restoration of the old mill location on Mill Street. The plan talks about the 33 acres of public-owned lands in association with the Fitch Hatchery, which the DNR gave to the city to be used for recreation. It also refers to the I-94 and Highway C South interchange land development. As you go forward with this focus group, please take a few minutes to read that plan, to see what was proposed / recommended, what came to fruition, and what did not 28 years later. History can teach us many things. Thank you. I just ask that those photos come back to me, please, when you're done looking.
Thank you, Mary.
You're welcome.
Anyone else want to make any public comments? No? Okay. Then we can move on to the summary of survey results. Amy?
Okay, hold on. I'm just going to make a note to provide you guys a copy of that plan on the website. And I can do that tomorrow morning. So before I go into the survey results, I did have a couple questions about where to find the materials on the website. So before we keep going through these meetings, I just want to show you where we go. The easiest thing to do is to just enter delafieldgrowth.com and you'll go directly to the website. I think it must be buried a little bit on the city's website. So I've just been going to delafieldgrowth.com. You can save it as a favorite, but it's just really easy to get to. And then on the top, these are the headers the pages rather. And so if you go to focus group materials, you'll see that you're on the focus group materials page by the title on the image. And then on the right side, we've got our upcoming meetings, and then the approved minutes from April. And then there's some documents on the left side, including a copy of the land use plan and zoning map. And then some of that market information that we talked about at the last meeting. Tom, you might want to take a look at that. I know you weren't here. And then the meeting materials are below that. So, and if we use the same materials from one meeting into the next meeting, I'm just recopying them, so you're not going back and forth. So for the June 8th meeting, we have the agenda, the draft minutes from May, which are now approved, all of the survey results and summary information for the visual preference survey, and then some summary information for the community SWOT analysis. The raw data is pretty intense, so that is not yet provided. I'll see if there's a way to provide some more information, but still making it readable, because there's a lot of stuff there. And then we've got all the dot exercise maps and the property maps that I supplied tonight. The hard copy maps are also on this website that you can go back to, okay? And then the next meeting, we'll do the same thing. So that's how you find it. If you have any questions, let me know. And I know we've been providing you the information kind of last minute. It's just somewhat challenging to get this material out ahead of time with how close these meetings are. So we did talk about the survey information at the last meeting a little bit. I tried to provide the information a little bit more succinctly this time, having some time to go through it. I would just ask, I don't want to spend a whole lot of time today. We'll just go through some of the main themes. Take a look at the results that I gave you the hard copies of for the community SWOT analysis and the visual preference survey. They look similar, but there's two different titles on these. If you come up with different takeaways than I did, come to the next meeting, please, prepared to provide those, and I can include those in the final report and findings to the Plan Commission and Council. But going back to what do you enjoy most about the city, we talked about this one a little bit at the last meeting. The main themes really came down to the fact that the community is quaint, rural, and has a small town feel. People like the downtown restaurants, retail, small businesses, parks, hiking, biking, trails, walkability. There's lots of different terms used that get to that. Lake and accessibility to the lake, the fact that there's large single-family residential lots. The city is safe and there's low crime rates. There's a lot of open green space, schools, and accessibility, and I think more specifically the location of the big box stores, the fact that they're all kind of tucked away in the 94-83 corridor. And then if you go to what the city's weaknesses are, so what's interesting about this, and I'm sure many of you have done SWOT analysis before for different purposes, a lot of times the strengths and weaknesses end up being somewhat similar, and in here you see that a little bit. So people really like the fact that the city has a downtown and events, but they also want more of them. And that there's several comments related to that desire for band shells or more live music as well. A desire for more diverse residential housing in neighborhoods, but also a desire to avoid overdevelopment. So you had some competing comments there. And so I think sometimes with that it's location, just making sure that you plan those areas appropriately. A desire for more and diverse food options, desire for more park and trail access, desire for more access to water resources and a need for maintenance of those resources, desire to have more retail shopping options, desire to have more multimodal transportation options, usually in communities like that, and some people were specific, that includes biking, walking, not necessarily the bus traffic.
We're not talking about light rail in Delafield.
I don't think so, but you know what, if you want to go there. Perceived lack of parking. Yeah, no, I think it's that opportunity to be close to a trail from your home so that you can bike and walk to different places. perceived lack of parking. And then there were several comments where the answer to weaknesses was nothing, that there were no weaknesses. Question number 3, main themes included thriving. So what do you see in other communities that you wish you saw in Delafield? A thriving downtown development. So that was also a strength. And I think that probably comes a little bit down to some of these communities are growing and changing really quickly, and so there's always something new happening, and maybe that's what folks are looking for, that thriving piece where it's always exciting. Unique restaurants, outdoor resources, recreation parks, unique shops and small businesses, community events, including music, farmers markets, and beer gardens, development, sense of community, and again, nothing. So you see that competing theme of development again, that other people have it, they want it here, going against, some of the too much development. What current trends and/or issues, if not addressed, could pose negative threats, challenges to Delafield? Some of the themes there were worry about potential tax increases, protection of water resources, environment, and green space, negative perceptions of apartments and multifamily housing, preservation of downtown, need for commercial development, desire for more young population, families, and professionals, perceived overdevelopment, concerned about growth and population increases, concerned traffic will become congested, a lack of affordable housing, and senior living. So that's what we came up with after reviewing thousands of answers. So again, feel free to look at this. I will provide to you after this meeting a little more raw data information if you want to go through that.
Can I
Yes,
make
sir.
an observation and just ask a question? So, observation first. It sort of strikes me how consistent these results are to what we did in our first meeting. I mean, I think that's really helpful for us to know that there are some pretty, at least a few lodestars here that are pretty universally agreed upon. My question is back to the visual survey. I'm not sure, are we doing something with that? I mean, I spent a little bit of time going through that, and I frankly couldn't come up with any
idea?
Any idea? I don't know what we conclude from that, and I don't know. Is that going to be part of our recommendation or report that we're going to have aesthetic recommendations?
No,
in it?
we're not going to get into architectural design or aesthetics. We threw it in there for a couple different reasons. One, we're doing a community survey, so why not throw it in? But also, we'll go through these themes as well, or notable takeaways. There's a couple things that you can get from it that may help make decisions with this group. So I think at the last meeting, we talked about the fact that really the industrial buildings, there was very little interest in the industrial style buildings. So although industrial buildings have the lowest long-term cost of services to the city, and it's nice, and industrial parks are a huge commodity in Waukesha County. I mean, that's how the business environment really is thriving for the most part. So, if you could find an area where you could have more industrial uses, that would be great, but they're not always desirable in their appearance. So how do you find the location that's tucked away and doesn't impact others? And if you can't find it, you can't find it. I mean, there's just not always room for it. So that would be an example. And then all of the groups dislike tiny houses, and although those pictures might have seemed interesting to you in my previous roles, now that you have those HDTV TV shows, and they're on the TV quite a bit, there actually are a lot of questions that come in. And I've had a few in Delafield where people have asked to have tiny houses. And they can have their place too. They can have their desirable place too. I just don't know if that is going to be in Delafield. But it's worth just finding a little bit of that out. And all three groups disliked that, or a majority of the folks did. So, and then some of the multifamily and level of density, it's kind of interesting too, because not for this group, because you're not going to get into the specifics. For us at the city level, it helps us guide developers in understanding what is perceived as more desirable. And I think even Mayor Atwell mentioned it to somebody last week. Go look at the visual preference survey results and see what kind of building style the community likes. Because when it comes to Plan Commission, we look at architecture and they don't know. So I think it has its value, but no, but we're not going to get into architecture. Sorry, long answer.
One other question, Amy. This is the results of this survey are from the community, not just from this group.
No.
Obviously, that's why.
No, and so I do want to point that out. The information, the themes that I just gave you are directly from the community survey. So I will be, when I provide my final recommendations and report to the Plan Commission and Council, I will include their responses too in main themes. They are, to David's point, they actually are very similar through all three groups, Plan Commission, Council, you, and this one. I didn't include those in here because they were included in the minutes from the last meeting, but I will in the final report.
Okay.
Good?
Yep, good.
So that
Any
comes
other
from the
questions
community.
about the surveys?
I just
Yes.
have a comment on the multifamily, whether it's this group or the city. At least how I've heard it when it's been referenced, both on this group and just listening to the city proceedings, it's always mentioned in a very generic way. And as a result, I think that there could be a wide dispersion of definition of what multifamily housing is. And I think at some point it would be helpful for the city to classify it into some buckets, because when I think of multifamily housing for Delafield, I'm always referencing whether it's good or bad, these, groups of 4 condominiums that are selling for 400 to 600,000 in Brookfield. That's very different than a 4-story apartment building.
Yeah.
So I just wanted to
And I think
mention
that's a really good point. And when we talk about multifamily on these properties, I think you should talk about what style you are interested in accepting. There are a lot, we don't have to get into the nitty gritty, but just understanding that is good. Some municipalities will have, and I'll just give an example, like MF multifamily, MF1, MF2, MF3, and that means no more than 4 units per building, or no more than 8 units per building, or no more than 16 units per building, and of a certain size to control the overall bulk. So you can certainly go those directions. The one thing I will caution you on, and I would need to have more deeper conversation with our attorney, is ownership. So when you think about multifamily, does that mean condominiums or apartments owned versus rented? You can't really enforce ownership through zoning ordinances, so you have to be very careful with that type of terminology. You can certainly look at condominiums have a very formal process. Everybody gets their own, what do you call it? Individual unit, what do you call them?
you're talking about
I'm having-
airspace.
For
I am having a complete,
undivided fractional interest.
no.
In a condo?
Yes. I'll come back to it. I'll think of
Okay.
it. But there's different terms, common elements, individual elements. I can't think of the exact terms. So they do have a very formal process that they have to go through, whereas an apartment can be a single property with a huge building and one person owns it. But somebody could condominiumize something and then rent out all of the units, and we have no control over that at all. So just keep that in mind.
And I had mentioned it at the first meeting that there's a certain density tolerance that everybody has. I think it's to your point, Scott, that you have what's too dense when you look at it from the air or the ground or whatever your perspective is. If it's a 4-story or a 10-story or a 1-story, if it's single family or multifamily, or it's a senior living center. I think that's a great thing, and I think we should talk about that in the context of all of these discussions. If we say industrial, does that mean we want, right now, an industrial building, the best industrial building you can build is probably going to be close to 30 feet high for all the needs that people have for stacking and packing and all of that, so they don't have to have a distribution center. If you go with a single-story flex building, and it's industrial and it's maybe some assembly but not manufacturing, there's so many different facets that you can go into. I won't go into them all now, but keep all those things in mind when we talk about this, because there's a lot of rabbit holes, but you have to have a vision for what the city's going to look like, and there's a lot of opportunity here to carry that vision out.
Okay, so just real quickly with the visual preference survey, I want to go through a couple of the takeaways. In the focus group and the Plan Commission Common Council had a lot less numbers, so compared to the community, so your percentages might be a little bit different because of that. But the community was a lot more neutral in their opinions. They didn't especially like or dislike nearly as many items as you and the focus group did. All three groups, and I think it's important to understand, and maybe this, David, is something that I think does help this group. All three groups favored image number 13, which is in your packet. You don't have to look at it now, but it included a community amenity. And so if you're looking, to promote something as part of this and you want to require community amenities in certain developments, you can do that, or require planned developments that then require community amenities. Everybody liked number 24, which is kind of showing an image of that pedestrian-friendly downtown environment. So you want to, potentially continue to support that type of feel. And then number 44, which is interesting to me because image number 44 is a higher density, single family residential subdivision along a street edge, which is, I believe that is a picture that's part of a planned development in Middleton. And it's a very desirable community to live in. And there were a couple of images in there from Middleton where they have these really unique high-density environments, and then
There's a similar development to that 44 right on the eastern edge of Madison and Cottage Grove.
Okay.
It's just that they look sort of older homes, but they're clearly planned and they're much higher density, but they're lovely.
Yeah.
I can see that in Delafield.
So I thought that was interesting. I think that might be, maybe for John, an interesting concept for like the St. John's area, where you can get a little bit more dense, close to downtown, but give that historic look. Cluster development was favored over traditional lots, and although the community was more neutral regarding the most recognizable conservation subdivision image, which was the image number 40. And some of that might be, they didn't have the benefit of hearing John's presentation on conservation subdivisions and understand that some of those areas are permanent open space. I don't know, but they weren't as favorable, but they did favor clustered development.
Just a point on the cluster environment, for those who are interested, a really good example of that is Carmel, Indiana. Now that's much larger than we would have to do in this community, but it gives you the sense of the variety and the look and the history of what that can look like. So if you just Google it, I've been there, but if you Google it, it'll give you a good feel.
Can you say that again?
Carmel, C-A-R-M-E-L, Indiana. It's north suburban Indianapolis.
They have a huge diversity of housing, and they have, I think the easiest way to picture it is Pabst Farms is 1,700 acres, and that's a typical plot of land for development that they would do in Carmel, where you'd have a complete master plan for the entire thing with commercial, residential, and everything in between. It's big time stuff.
But the housing component of it, I think you could miniaturize in your mind and view something like it in some of the areas we've been talking about in Delafield.
And they have the full spectrum, from entry-level rentals to the highest end, single family. It's a good, diverse product.
Can I ask a question? Number 44, is that single family? Are those duplexes? Are those owned?
I believe
rental?
number 44 is single-family homes.
Single family
Milton
homes?
Hills.
I don't know if that one is Middleton Hills, but I think Middleton Hills is in one of those pictures.
Most of these with the front porches have alley-loaded garages in the back.
Okay.
So it's, when you don't see the garage in here, it's hard to tell, but I don't see a garage on these. But that's usually, they usually have a 5 or 10 foot setback from the sidewalk, and it's all about the front porch. Everybody has to have a front porch, and it has to be usable. It can't just be a 6 foot deep porch. It's got to be 8 or 10 or 12 so that people actually use it. It can't
Is
be
it
decorative.
similar to what's east of here by the apartments? Is
It's
that block?
South Bleecker Street.
Oh.
Yeah,
It's exactly, everyone's got the front
Yeah.
porch, they're,
right?
what are those, 15 feet from the
Yeah,
lot
that
line,
would be it.
basically?
Yeah.
That'd be a
They
good,
have
was
an
the
alley
idea.
with the garages?
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Okay,
very small offsets between homes,
right.
very classic in all of its design.
Alley in the back, garages in the back.
And I think those, Tom, those sold really fast, right?
No.
No?
There were a lot of open lots for a long
No,
time.
it didn't sell that.
Okay.
It took a while.
I think you could attribute
Could
that to the
now in this
economy.
market.
Now
Yeah.
it's full, I think.
Now they're going
It took a
crazy.
while.
The majority of them sold pretty quickly, but there's a few stragglers. Is
Is that right?
the case? I thought
No, we
that's-
used to walk over there, and it took a while for that to catch on.
I think the lots sold quickly.
Yeah.
Oh, maybe.
The
Maybe
buildings
that
took
was
a
it.
while. Because I don't remember lots being on the market for more than about 16, 18 months.
And I think there's only one empty one,
Yeah.
so, right now. One house just went up in one of the lots within the last few months.
That was started probably 8 years ago?
If you built it,
Who's a developer for the apartments? McCormick, I thought,
That was his second phase. He did Delafield
Right.
Lakes first, and then
Right.
Delafield Woods. Yeah, it was probably 2012, 2013 in there
yeah,
somewhere.
I kind of thought.
if you built that same product today,
Oh.
it would be gone in a month.
Really?
At that price point, anything around 500,000 or 600,000 is gone, just like that. Boom. That's entry level new construction in Waukesha County. Just really crazy.
So, and then all of the groups, just like many of the industrial buildings and the hotel images, and, you know, we might be talking about hotels as part of this group, so it would be interesting to find out what type of hotel is desirable. All groups disliked several of the older one-story multi-tenant buildings. All groups disliked several of the larger scale multifamily and mixed-use developments. I think that demonstrates that there's a max point in how much bulk is accepted in the community. Let's see, what else have we not talked about? And then there's just then I just point out a couple of disparities between the different groups, but we don't need to get into that tonight. But please do look at both of those documents before the next meeting, and feel free to add on as needed. Then the next, I guess, John, does anybody have any other questions on the survey information? Nope, okay.
That's good.
I think it is I think there's a lot of valuable information in there, honestly.
All right, let's move on to the summary of cost and of community services study.
Oh, and I'm sorry, gotta go back, because I wanted to bring this up at the last meeting, because there's comments about underdevelopment and there's comments about overdevelopment in the city of Delafield. And I just happen to be working with another building inspector who's pretty busy, and asked for the numbers. And in the town of Oconomowoc, which doesn't have a ton of new development, there were 18 new home permits issued in 2020, and this year there have been 8 permits for new homes so far. In the village of Summit, where you do have like the Lake Country Village and Interlochen Village, the huge developments in Paps Farms, last year there were 90 new home permits issued, and this year there's already 41 new home permits. In Delafield last year there was a total of 9, and this year 1. So I think that just kind of shows you the amount of new construction. It would be very difficult for somebody to find a lot for a new home in this community right now.
Amy, can I comment on that? Mm-hmm. Is that directly tied to the cost of building materials and lumber?
I think here, or in this whole area, it's availability.
Everywhere.
It's inventory and
It's lots.
availability.
Huh?
It's lots.
Just having
Not
lots.
built,
The
not
number of
material
buildable
costs.
lots are at a scary low number right now across the country, but particularly here in Waukesha County.
I mean, Jerry, this is a multi-year trend in Delafield that there's just not an inventory of lots for new construction.
Well, and even like if Scott was here, he would say like the 9 from last year and 1 this year, they're almost all redeveloped lots, like the lake lots and what
Lake
have you,
lots,
where people
yeah.
are rebuilding on existing lots. Not so much the creation of new ones.
Interesting.
One of them is a lake lot. The one this year is a lake lot because we pulled it.
Oh,
It's on Upper Neshota Lake. That's the only one so far.
Has there been any indication why some of the property owners or developers aren't pursuing some of the open land and some of the available?
Cost
Yeah.
of infrastructure.
Exactly. Yeah.
But yet they're doing it, is it because of pre-development in like Pabst Farms and that those lots had been laid out a while ago? Or I mean, why is there such a discrepancy between the other communities in Delafield right now?
The feedback that staff has gotten from developers over the last 5 to 8 years is the majority of land in Delafield that's available for residential development is zone 2-acre density, and that just doesn't pencil out as far as for the developer or for the property owner as far as the cost of lots and affordability of building a house.
I mean, it goes back to what John hit on last week is the more road you have to build for the larger lots and the more space between them, the higher the cost and the lot we have to sell them for and the infrastructure costs. So the more density you can get with them, the lower the cost of the lot is for us developers.
So nobody has pursued a rezoning initiative on any of the potential land, or they have and it's been unsuccessful, or?
Nobody has.
Seatman.
I think we've done the only one.
I mean,
With
Seatman's
Hawthorne
working on
Farm.
one right now with Hawthorne Farm.
Okay.
Which will be a 2-acre density, and now they are condensing the development and reducing the amount of infrastructure and providing a significant amount of open space. But I'm sure they would appreciate more density too if they could get it.
Yeah, I think Tom and John stated it well. It's pretty obvious people are taking, it has to have density right now to make it pencil out. It's just not even worth a sniff at 2-acre density. We wouldn't have enough buyers. But you can see Pabst Farms with, those are 8,000 square foot lots, 8 to 10,000 square feet, and they can pack a lot of homes in a small area, so naturally they can take the economies of scale and make it work.
But is there I know anything can be changed, but I keep reading in literature about these 2 acres or lots for a home. Is there an a priori, you can't get it done in Delafield to change any zoning? Because it seems to me if you can't, I don't know what this group's going to do. If you can only buy $1 million, $1.5 million, build $1.5 million homes on a 2-acre lot, if
Well, I
you
think
can't
that's-
change the zoning,
yeah.
I mean, that's just what you've asked
I think that's
for.
part of what what the focus of this group is to determine whether or not that is the direction to continue to go into or not. If the city continues that direction, then the city needs to understand that they're going to continue to have a lack of new development likely, which might affect long-term, your long-term tax base increase, because you can only really increase your base with new development. So,
And there is at least from my experience on the Plan Commission, it's a political issue too. There's a strong local constituency that feels very strongly that the 2-acre lot size, I think, is a proxy for the rural environment of Delafield that a lot of people feel very strongly about. So that's I think there's no reason it can't be changed, but I think there are some there's some politics to it as well.
Psychological barriers or other.
And either way, it's an important discussion because with all municipalities, you have fixed boundaries that you're working within. Once you develop them, you've used up that land area until someday when somebody wants to redevelop it. So it's important to think about it and plan the best you can on the front end, I guess.
Amy, if we're talking about costs of community services, we seem like we talk a lot about residential here. And I thought the focus of this, unless I missed something, was to how to help the city handle their budget deficit. And hasn't it been proven that commercial has much less cost of services than residential?
Yeah, so cost of community services study is the next item on the agenda. I think you called that out and then I circled backward. The city and the economic development specialists with SEH are still working out some of the details, so that report is not available. But they did provide a few takeaways, and yes, typically commercial and industrial uses have less cost of services than residential.
I mean, impact to schools, police, fire,
Yeah.
DPW.
However, it has been noted in here as a summary piece that because the value of homes is so high in Delafield, the cost is actually pretty close or under a 1-to-1 ratio. So you do well with the way that residential development is constructed in the city right now.
What
I
does
thought
that
there was
mean?
quite a
one to
So
gap.
your ratio is lower than in most areas. Usually the ratio is higher than a 1-to-1 ratio. The cost of services is higher than,
So for every dollar of tax revenue that a typical residential is producing, it costs $1 to provide those services.
Right.
In many communities, the
Yeah.
commercial is actually subsidizing the residential.
Correct.
And the higher the density, or I'm sorry, is it the higher the density of the residential, the higher the cost?
well, yeah,
Lower density?
I think it can, yeah, I mean, it can depend on how it's constructed.
Yeah,
and
again, but just in general terms, I think that's.
And the type of residence. I mean, senior living can add a little extra cost of services with police and emergency. And did Dan's final number, I mean, they were communicating and changing things today, when I have not read through it, but was the ratio less than 1-to-1?
It is, yeah. So Delafield was found to be very unique in that our residential actually sustains itself. We came in at a ratio of 0.98, where Dan's never had a community that's been under a 1. So that means that for every dollar of taxes we receive from residential, we've got 98 cents worth of costs. With commercial, it was 93 cents, so it's a little bit better. Manufacturing is actually a 0.67. So, I mean, if you can find a way to get manufacturing or industrial into your community, that's the most significant beneficiary.
So I guess I'm confused. If we're talking about adding residential to our city, and the residential we add is going to break even with the increased cost of community services, where does that get us in making up this deficit that we were talking about at the first meeting?
That's exactly right.
I think it's a tough one. I think you can talk about two different things. You can talk about the benefits of industrial development and how strong it can be for the tax base because it has so little load on the community. It's great. But if you look at residential, let's just take Carriage Hills, for example. Those are pretty big, open, they're probably 1.5 lots or acre lots. There's probably a fair amount of green space in there. Say there's 1.5 acres per lot in that site. If you just took a square and drew it over a random part where there's, say, 3 or 4 houses, so maybe a 4-acre square, and you took the tax revenue for the city from that square, and then you take a square and you put it over an area closer to downtown where you have more density, the same 4-acre square, you're going to come out way ahead in that city or closer in area for tax revenue than you will in Carriage Hills. So it's called tax density. It's a simple way to illustrate it. And oftentimes people will say, well, we want the big expensive homes because we want that extra tax revenue. But when you spread them out so far, it also spreads out that tax density. So I think part of the reason we're here is to look at opportunities to increase tax revenue. And when you increase density, it can increase tax revenue. And when it nets out at the end, as Tom is talking about, that you guys are pretty even, and that's a great thing. That's a really good thing that you guys are at that balance point. But you want to be a little ahead of it, not a little behind it, and that's where it's starting to slip right now in tax revenues.
Did we break down the cost of community services based on the various zoning districts, like residential, RL1, RL2, et cetera? No?
No, just broken down into agricultural,
They're still working on it.
manufacturing,
That's why I don't
commercial,
wanna get too far ahead.
residential, and exempt property.
Okay. So if you're saying if we have 2-acre lots today, if you cut that in half, potentially it'd be better cost of community services, net benefit to the city of Delafield?
Yeah.
Okay.
But it's actually more on the revenue side.
Mhm.
I can't speak exactly to the services that would require, but I would guess that when you have a denser area, you might need a little bit more services, but plowing, you're going to need, if you had double the number of lots on the same amount of property, you're going to have more tax going in, revenue going in for the same amount.
Well, and I think another way to look at it is that, as you were talking about, John, the higher density of the tax base allows you more flexibility when it comes to budgeting, because you can't buy $2 worth of police protection. You
Yes.
buy police protection in officers and units.
Yes.
You can't buy $10 worth of a fire truck. And you can't buy, so the greater the density of the tax base gives you more flexibility in that budgeting process to hit kind of the sweet spot. It's always a balancing act, but the higher the density is, the easier it is to do that balancing act, because you're working in a smaller increment, a tax increment there. So
That's a
But
good
don't you
explanation.
also have like X number of police officers per Y amount of population, and the same thing with fire? And at what point, as soon as you cross that threshold, you need another officer or another fire truck or whatever. And so now you feel like you got to go all the way to the top of that bracket to pay for it.
And Ken, that's a great point, in that if you are dealing with 10 units and the breakdown for a police officer is 3.5, that's more difficult to budget for when you have, we've got to add 30% more to our residential base to get one more unit of officer or fire department or whatever. If you've got a higher density there, it makes it a lot easier to do that budgeting. It doesn't mean that you don't hit those spikes. You could go 3 units over your requirement for, police protection. However, you're only a fraction of a percent in total over that need for an additional officer, whereas if your units are much bigger on the tax base, it just makes that problem solving a lot more difficult.
Are there any studies about density requiring, having higher crime rates and requiring more officers? Is there anything out there in city planning regarding that?
I think there's a lot of information that is available, and we can certainly come back at the next meeting and share some more of that information. I know the report that hasn't been shared with you yet is also still pending. So maybe this is a better conversation to continue at the next meeting. But I just did want to point out one other important thing. Although residential costs more than commercial and industrial, it's important in a community to have a balance of everything, because if you want to entice the commercial users or even the industrial, you need the employees and you need the residential base. And even Hendricks building that very valuable building downtown, hopefully that gets constructed, that brings a ton of tax base to the community. But they need residential folks to come and occupy or consume the businesses that would go within the building. And so there has to be a balance. That's why you want to have a little industrial that's cheaper so that you can afford the residential people that you also want and need in your community. So
Because-
that's where it's a challenging balancing act, and there's a lot of factors at play. I think crime is tied to a lot of different factors, not just density. And I think in Delafield in particular, I mean, it is a higher end community. You have a pretty low crime rate overall. So
We just did add a
different.
police officer not so long ago, correct? An additional one?
We had 2.
Add a police officer.
So in 2012, the city decreased the staff by 1, and then in 2017, they replaced that 1 plus added another 1.
Okay. Was there a study as to why we needed that, or was it just?
It's primarily based on the recommendation that at any point in time, there should be 2 officers on duty.
Okay.
And even with this increase in staffing, we're not to the point where we always have 2 officers on duty.
Okay, makes sense.
It seems like a lot of officers, but when you stop to realize that there are big chunks of time in which there is 1 officer on duty for the entire city, that's pretty scary. And it feels a little paltry. So that was part of the impetus for the support of adding that officer.
That makes sense.
So I have a question about this. So the ratio, the residential ratio, you said was sort of uniquely positive for Delafield, and yet we're very much not dense, right? So I'm trying, what's driving? So is that completely unrelated? Is it just property value that's driving that good ratio, or something else?
High property value. I mean,
Okay.
it costs the city the same, generally it costs the city the same amount to service a $200,000 house as it does to service a $2 million house. But for one, we receive much more tax revenue.
Okay. So if we push this towards higher density, we don't want to push it towards higher density and lower cost is going to drive that ratio up in a way that's going to be unhelpful to the budget situation, right? I mean, if we can do higher density and keep property values high, that's all good. But if we're pushing these recommendations towards higher density, lower value properties, that ratio is probably going to go from 0.9 maybe to 1 or above.
Well, there's a couple factors in play. So one limiting factor of a cost of services study is it looks at a point in time. This is just looking at the 2021 budget. My concern with a study like this is, like some people are alluding to, there's a lot of fixed costs in our budget that are not going to go up with development. If we add 20% more residential, we're still only going to have 1 police chief. We're still only going to have 1 fire chief. We're still only going to have 1 city administrator, 1 city clerk. Your rank and file staff will increase over time. Different departments have some capacity to handle some amount of growth before they need to see some staff growth. But over time, the fact that we have fixed costs, you'll see a combination of the ratio go down slightly over time because of that. And perhaps if we increase density, so property values come down, maybe those would counter each other. But I think we got to ask ourselves, how much are property values going to go down if you cut density from 2 acre to 1 acre? I mean, 1 acre is still considered to be very low density. And quite frankly, the current market, a lot of people don't want to take care of a 2 acre property and may value a 1 acre property equal or greater than a 2 acre property.
But Tom, given what you told us at 0.9 for residential, maybe it's just me, but that kind of tells me we're doing something right. Not necessarily doing something wrong. And if the zoning state is 2 acre, yet the green space, and the cluster that we've heard about, it still has that open feeling.
See, I would speculate that a big portion of that ratio is due to the acceleration factor that lake frontage does to many of the properties here.
Yeah.
The lake is built out, so you're not going to add a lot of lake lots. So you build a 6,000 square foot house in a subdivision, you build that exact same 6,000 square foot on a lake, the property or the tax assessment is doubled or more.
Understood.
So, and Delafield has a lot of lake property, but that's done. So what's...
True. That doesn't mean that what we're doing is necessarily wrong up to this point as the city either.
But again, I would say
But it'd be
that
nice to
doesn't
get
mean if
some
you
data
continue...
Is per zoning areas, what is the cost of services versus the return in tax revenue? And that may be hard to accumulate that.
Yeah, and I think it's important to not over-focus on the cost of community service. I think the good news is residential development isn't a huge burden on the city, but if you go take a couple steps backward and look at the SWOT analysis, for example, people really like the downtown in the commercial areas. Well, when we met with the Citizens for Responsible Growth and talked to a couple of the business owners in downtown, they're having a hard time surviving. They want more people. They need to get the consumers in, or your downtown may not thrive long term. And I think it's really important to always be looking forward to make sure that your existing environments, you have great ones, you've got 83 and 94, and you've got downtown, that you support their ability to continue to thrive. So it doesn't mean you have to have super high density everywhere in the city. It's just you have to keep in mind that you want to maintain success in the city long term for the
I think another way
community.
to maybe think about it is, who says 0.91 is the right ratio? Maybe 0.75 is the right target. And what would 0.75 look like?
Yeah,
In
what
my
is our-
head,
what is our context to
yeah,
this?
it would look something like what you're talking about. And it could be, it's just to simplify it, you have $1.2 million house on a 2-acre lot, or $2 million or $1 million house on that same 2-acre lot split into two. You've just increased your tax revenue significantly. So I think I would tend to look at it from that perspective in terms of how we could perhaps come up with some ideas that can help the city in a win-win way with taxes. And before we leave it, and if this isn't too hard to do, I'd be curious of it, because when I first looked at the ratios, and I always look at it from a business perspective, and I know that municipalities are different, but I couldn't help get my head around the fact, when they originally were talking about a ratio over 1, how, to what you were saying, Tom, how adding another one of those same ones today wouldn't offset fixed cost. I just couldn't get my head around it. So that gets me back to what the assumptions are in the model. And I'm wondering if you could share the key assumptions with us that are in the model so we can look at them. As you say, that's a snapshot in time, but I think that can sometimes be a useful way to wrap your head around these
Yeah, and
things.
you'll be seeing that information. So different department heads and key staff members went through the budget line by line and gave our best approximation for every budget line item, how much of that is attributable to each type of development. We did that for both the revenues and the expenses. And that's what was used for the calculations. And you'll be seeing in the report full tables of all the assumptions that were made for each budget line item.
But do you have that then broken out by what you're attributing to fixed cost versus variable cost?
We do not, and that would be
To me, that's
really be beyond the scope of what we've asked SEH to do for us.
okay.
And I would say significantly beyond the scope as far as the amount of effort that would be required.
Okay.
And I think it's important to get those results before we go too much farther in this, because it's easy to talk about a lot of these things, but until we have the concrete evidence, it's going to be tough. But there's a lot there. There's a lot of meat on that bone to chew on. So there's going to be a million more questions when we get to that point. But these are all really good things to keep in mind as you look at those numbers. And Tom, is there a national number or a local, regional number or anything that you can give us that would be, to give us some relativity to the numbers that we have here in the city of Delafield?
Yeah, so Dan Bowditch is the expert with this, with SEH. He's out of their Indiana office. He's got those numbers. He did tell me them in the past, and I can't remember what it was for residential. I thought he might have said something like 1.1 or 1.15 or something like that, but
I think
I
they're
mean,
It was 1.16 on the residential
They're in
when he did
the,
his presentation.
they're in a
Okay.
presentation on
What's
here.
I would be curious as to what that ratio is in Carmel, Indiana. That's just not 1.16. It's an average, you're talking about a consolidated average, and that's, I think, the point I'm trying to get at.
Yeah, I think looking at other services that have, or these surveys that have done recently for similar type communities would be valuable for us to look at.
And Amy, I don't know if he could provide it, but if there's any information that, you know, in the planning world on consumer trends, because somebody had mentioned earlier that, you know, 20 years ago, the 2-acre lot was many people's dream. I mean, today that's many people's nightmare. I mean, that's not where people are going. You know, they don't want to be cutting grass and raking leaves and doing all of that. So you know, our 2 acres from 20 years ago today might be a 1/4 acre, and that's enough for the average consumer. And I don't know if there's information on that trending. I mean, it's.
Yeah, well, and I'm sure John has that information as a developer too, but I can tell you from reviewing subdivisions and working with a lot of the developers in our areas that's what I hear over and over and over again. People do not want large lots anymore. They want the smaller lots, and the open space areas out on the fringes of the development provide a lot of value and can increase the property value of a subdivision versus having the larger lots. So I'm sure, I mean, John could probably speak to that more. I do want to get moving tonight. I know this is an important topic, but I do want to get into those map areas again. But I think as far as consumer trends, they're changing. There's a lot of multifamily and apartment requests too. A lot of young professionals are looking for apartments instead of single-family homes. I think single-family homes are just getting harder and harder to afford. But they are interested in the smaller lot sizes.
And just one quick thing. The context of Carmel is great, but they're at 105,000 people.
No, I get it.
We're at 8, so.
I'm just trying to make a point about
Yeah.
your density. If you take
Yeah.
2-acre lots and put $1 million house on each versus $1.5 million house on 2 acres, you've increased your tax revenue on a ratio basis for that unit to 25%.
yeah, and
That's
that,
good.
you know, that opportunity to increase the tax base, that's pretty exciting, because, you know, you look at the existing study that looks at 2021, and the average house value today in the city of Delafield is a little over $380,000. And if we are able to do additional residential development, those houses are not going to be $380,000. John, what are they going to average, $750,000?
Easily. Well, it depends on what you do.
Right.
Entry level in Delafield would be,
But in Waukesha
Today,
County, you're not getting
600.
into a new house for less than 500 or 600 at the very bottom, right?
you could build them smaller, but you'd have to have 1/8 acre lots, you know, like the really tiny alley served.
Yeah.
I think in Lake Country Village, I think some of those are
There's
some of them
like
are in the
5,000,
400s.
They were before the lumber prices went
Well,
up.
yeah, that,
But if we're talking about 2-acre versus 1-acre parcels, I mean, we're
That's a big
talking
difference.
$750,000 homes at least, right? Or
Yeah.
average?
Easily.
and Craig, not that this is a trend, but having planned for Waukesha County as a whole, generally, even in unincorporated areas, where preserving rural character is a very big component of every one of the land use plans and zoning codes. When lots are served by septic system, the zoning categories in land use plan are generally falling within a 1 to 5 acre range. And then there's some exclusive agricultural where you have the 35 acre category. Those are typically those large farms that have the ability to sustain themselves over a long period of time. But lots that are served by sewer, rarely do I see those, even in unincorporated areas, have a zoning requirement of more than 20,000 square feet per lot.
And again, I'm seeing it, I mean, I have two children, and they both, one has built a house in the central business district here, and the other one owns a lot and is going to build in the central business district. They're pretty typical for a 25 and a 30-year-old, and this is their dream area. You know, they're not into the 5 acres or the 3 acres. They want to be in a nice house that would have been put on a 2-acre lot 20 years ago, but is now put on a 1/4 acre, or in one case, a 3/10 of an acre lot, or a 0.13 acre, I think is actually what it is. And they want the access to the city and the life. So again, I just think it's a different, it's a different trend that's out there than it was 20 years ago, maybe when some of these the 2-acre lot was there. So, and you can always build more houses or more density. You can never create more land within the city. So,
Yeah, at some point, it'll be topped off, and it'll just be a redevelopment opportunity. If you look at the city of Waukesha, they're very close to that point right now, especially now that they have the water compact in place. They can't go any farther. So they have no choice but to put higher density on everything that they have, because they need to continue to increase their revenue, and they're going to plateau at some point at that build-out point where you have to look at major redevelopment, where you take out whole blocks and you TIF them and you incentivize them to get brick and mortar up in the air that's new and will produce more tax revenue than it is as a crumbling. So, man, we could do this for a week.
Yeah.
All good
Time to
points.
move on. We'll come back to it. We'll definitely come back to cost of community services. It's just taking a little bit longer than we had originally anticipated, and we want to get it right.
All right, so now we're on the deeper dive mapping exercise. It looks like we're going to start on map number 1, is that correct? The northeast quadrant.
Yes, so detail map number 1, I'm doing this a little bit differently this time. Because I want to have the Waukesha County GIS up on the screens. I think you all have access. Can you all see a screen? So what I did is I printed out, we already did the northwest quadrant of the city, so I didn't make maps for that. I'll end up adding them to the final summary document anyway. But we, at the last meeting in detail map area 1, which is the northeast corner, we talked about the Morris property. We finished that area up. I guess one thing I wanted to talk about that I didn't bring up last meeting that I think is worth just discussing. There was some discussion about mixed-use environment, having that residential, commercial, and potential industrial uses, but that the industrial uses be tucked to the north, and then the commercial toward 83 and the residential toward the west and south. If in our final voting at the next meeting or two, you want to talk about or encourage special use areas, that is another option where you could be a little bit more specific about where on properties you want certain types of uses. And then, not that you have to get into this, but as we would move forward and potentially propose recommendations to the land use plan, we can actually call, instead of just calling it mixed use, because that's pretty much what you had come up with at the last meeting. Instead of just calling it a mixed use category on the land use plan, you can highlight an area and call it special use district 1, and then you can go to the land use plan and get a paragraph about a little bit more about the property and what's appropriate. Like, for example, industrial. When you were talking about that, you were talking about very limited industrial or manufacturing. You could just call that out in the plan, so that when someone comes in for either a zoning amendment or a specific site plan, we go and we refer to that land use language. Okay? So then, so that's the Morris property. I don't think we really need to talk about that one right now, but it does join up with the Sela property, which is the second map that is provided here. And we included, so north of the river, we included the fact that preferably the Morris and Sela properties would be part of a planned development. And that you have this cul-de-sac from the west, what is the name of it? Fairs Lake Parkway, that would, it's intended to actually be extended to the east. That would be extended and that you would have your residential development to the east and then head north. Sela also owns land south of the river, and we did not really get into that. The river is definitely a dividing zone. They could certainly attempt to put a bridge in there and cross it and cross wetlands and floodplains and all that jazz, but that gets pretty difficult. So I think today where we need to start is the south side of the river on the Sela holdings. So if you look at this map, the south side of the river is the 65-acre land. And these properties, they all blend into each other. Right now, it's zoned A1E exclusive agriculture, and which it requires a 35-acre lot size. And there is some A1 zoning. The south side of the river is A1. Yeah, the south side of the river is A1, which requires a minimum 3-acre lot size. But the land use plan has an agricultural district, which requires a land use plan amendment in order to get to that 3-acre lot size. Sewer and water services are available. So again, you've got those infrastructure costs related to having services. You have the benefit of the services, but a very, very low density. And then I just describe a little bit about the access, which we already talked about, but they have access off of 83. And then potentially, ideally, if you want to go, I think I might be missing a map, but the property to the south of that, it would make sense for the Sela holdings to also be tied to the property to the south of that.
And then
Is
full
that the one off of
disclosure.
Hirschman? Is that the one off of Hirschman?
Yes.
I've got that map.
I've got
Yeah.
it.
I was gonna say, what did I miss? I don't have it.
Yeah.
So I'm going to just, for full disclosure, tell you that I'm one of the owners of the Lake Country Land property, so I won't comment on it.
Of the
Unless
what?
you have questions. The Lake Country Land property off of Hirschman Lane, the southernmost one that is in this grouping of vacant lands.
So, and I believe, so if you look at Sela and the Lake Country holdings, south of that, the southwest square is a city, is that a passive city park, Tom?
Yeah.
And then you've got Oakwood Church, and then you've got the residential uses to the west. And the commercial park to the east.
Just out of curiosity, what is a passive city park?
Well, there really aren't any improvements there.
Well, there's some
Frisbee
limited.
Well, there's an ice hockey rink and there's,
Disc golf, we put up a hockey rink during the winter, it's got walking paths. Those were all intended to be medium-term limit uses for now until the city figures out what they want to do permanently with that park.
is that where the weeds are dumped to?
Yes, we do dump
Okay.
the lake weeds there as well, and then they dry there, and then the farmer takes them onto his land and spreads them on his land.
And it
So-
should also be noted
go ahead.
that the entire 83 corridor has sewer and water service.
Yes.
So how large is the Lake Country Land parcel? What's the total acreage?
72 acres.
What's the little square that cuts out to the north and east?
It's the
That's a
event barn.
residential.
So some,
There's 2 homes there,
okay.
maybe 3.
And I think it was maybe part of an old farmstead with that tied to this acreage. It's got some,
You can
Is
see it
older
better.
is that the
farm
wedding
buildings.
barn? or-
No, it's not the wedding barn. This is farther south.
The wedding barn's right on the river.
Yeah, the wedding barn is
A little
I
bit
can-
further
Oh,
north.
northeast
okay.
of the
I see
Right
it.
Right here.
southern Sela property.
I mean, this combined property strikes me as sort of an obvious resident, residential opportunity.
I would agree.
It fits, it strikes me from just what we've seen so far, the best kind of green field for some significant residential development.
So I'll just, if you don't mind, there were a lot of stickers on this area. Well, I shouldn't say a lot. There were 3 stickers, but they are a little bit different. So you've got conservation subdivision, another sticker, commercial industrial, another sticker, high density residential and institutional. So it's kind of, the original comments are kind of similar to what you ended up recommending for the Morris property, which is a little bit of a mix of everything. And then there is a sticker 143, which states conservancy area, leave that area preserved and potential public access.
Which there is a trail that is mapped as part of the city's trail program along the western boundary of all of these properties and through that river corridor. Pardon me?
Bridle?
No, this is on the future trail map. But yes, there are some bridle paths in that area too from the old Oakwood Farm.
But to Dave's point, Amy, I think when we were all putting our stickers down, I mean, I think all of those uses could be appropriate, but residential might be the best use. I'm not saying it is, but I think that's a good observation. At some point, I don't know how narrow you want this group to get.
So you were saying to conservation subdivision, right, David?
Yeah, I mean, look, I'm sold on the conservation subdivision as a default setting. I think it's exactly the right direction. So yeah, if I could pick, that's what I'd pick.
Any comments if it were residential on density?
One quick question, if that or any parcel that abuts Highway 83 is it appropriate to have residential ingress and egress onto 83 for a subdivision, or would that be avoided? Or isn't there really a preference for
So
that?
the state will want to limit those intersections.
Right now, the state has informed us that they will accept one on the Lake Country land and one on the Sela property. And it's actually where the wedding barn access is. That's a shared access point that will be an intersection at some point with Walnut.
So it'd line up with across the street, you'd probably end up having a 4-way intersection there.
Probably a signal and all that stuff.
Okay. I was just curious if you had to come in from the west by an extension, or would it be logical then to tie, what is that current subdivision that dead ends there? Is that Hirschman? Would that be tied into the subdivision, which would give it a throughway?
Depends on what happens there.
Okay.
And what the city's.
It is mapped to do that.
Okay.
It's usually the goal is to connect adjacent developments.
But if you have, let's just say, for example, it goes to industrial, just to throw it out there. The last thing Hirschman Lane is going to want is for 53-foot trucks going through. So usually what'll happen is there will be an emergency access way with some bollards or a fence or a gate or something.
Well, and by the same token, if, let's say, you did 100 lots in there, the last thing Nagwick Road would want would be a connection point to 100 lots dumping on there. Not that that necessarily would be the traffic pattern.
Hirschman Lane's not going to want that connection to happen no matter what it is.
So
because they've been living on a cul-de-sac forever.
But they all built with the knowledge that that would someday be.
They're not going to agree with that.
It's a lifelong, it's an issue with any development like this.
Did anybody put a sticker for an airport on that piece of property?
I will guarantee that every single person on that will come out.
Number of people.
Every single person will come out and say, "We bought to be on this cul-de-sac. You can't extend it." I will guarantee.
Yes.
That will be the #1 beef on that. On the end of that.
And I think that's something that we have to be conscious of in all of these discussions is, where are those pinch points going to be?
The other access would be across from, I can't recall the name of the street.
Sorry,
in the
I'm looking
industrial
at that.
park. It's already there.
Could you tie it into the road between that currently runs to the park through the church property
Walnut Ridge?
to the south?
Oakwood?
Yeah,
We
Oakwood.
can't get to Oakwood, but we can get to Walnut Ridge on both of the entrances. So Walnut Ridge is like a big reverse C.
Where's that? Where?
But you have that semicircle
show it
road
there.
accessing the park and the church right
I'm
now.
not familiar with that.
Could that split the property lines and connect to the north?
Walnut Ridge? Okay. So that would be the access.
It could
Not
potentially.
83.
No, it'll be 83 and that
And
intersection.
that, but that breaks it up.
I don't
quite a
know
bit.
that would be, I'm not sure that it would be desirable or not, because you have the church and then a park environment, but, I mean, there usually needs to be 2 points of ingress and egress, which could be this loop, and/or a loop and this connection. It does depend on the development. I mean, you don't want big industrial loading trucks to go to
They're-
Nagawicca Road, so it depends on what you.
There are creative
use it
ways
be.
to design those streets, much to probably Tom's chagrin with his plow crews and everything, but there are ways to deter through
Well, it's like
traffic.
Hawks Nest. If you try and get into Hawks Nest and you're not familiar with that,
Yeah,
it's
you gotta
very
twist
easy to
it
get
around.
lost and not find your way out for a little bit.
That
So
was all by design.
I figured it.
Or if you had,
Fox
I mean,
Hills
let's
is
just
similar.
say you had a mixed-use environment, you could have the commercial on a circle, and trail to multifamily or low-density, single-family on the west side. That does connect that Hirsch, it depends on what you propose. What's the name of that street? Hirschman Lane.
And the Hirsch Road, is that, what, are those 2 acre lots in there?
Three.
That's three.
Three?
Three.
They're big. 3.
3-acre lots.
What are the economics of that property from a standpoint in today's environment of lot size? And I know you've recused yourself already, but just out of curiosity, is that a 3/4 an acre is the sweet spot, smaller? So,
And maybe John can answer that better than.
John, what's the sweet spot?
I don't know if there's a sweet spot.
I don't know, I'm not a residential land developer, so I would guess it's smaller than 1/4 acre though.
And would that be clustered then if you did something like that?
Sure.
A lot of open space and like clustered lobes in different areas, or?
Yeah, but as I mentioned, when you get smaller lots, you're going to get smaller amounts of open space. So go back to that Washington Highlands slide that I had
Yeah.
where there's just slivers. It'd be more than that, but it wouldn't be Hawks Nest at 50%. It really depends. We've done a couple subdivisions like this where the property is basically featureless. There's absolutely not one tree or wetland or stick growing out of this other than corn and beans. So it's not really that exciting. So we have to kind of create something cool out of it with the little bit of topography that's there.
I don't want to cut to the chase, but is that a 200 lot subdivision? Or more?
I don't think 200, but it would be significantly more than 2 acres per unit, that's for sure. So 1/4 acre lot would be a target, I think.
Okay, but on 75 acres then, so you're,
So 7 times 4. Yeah.
so that's what, 200?
Yeah, say 200.
Okay. Okay.
By the time you get open space and right-of-ways and ponds and all of that stuff.
But if you combined the two, I mean, if you treated the 2 parcels the same, you'd have substantially more than that, right? I mean, if you
Yeah.
added Sela into that as well, which would make, I mean, it may not be one development, but it might be of a kind.
And I don't want
Put a
to,
lot of homes in there.
and not specifically about that property, but it's important to think about if you were to buy a lot backing up to a 4-lane highway, which 83 will be at some point, most likely in our lifetimes. Would you want to back right up to it, or would you rather have something buffering you from that highway?
Yeah.
And that's where that, not mixed use, but maybe mixed residential would be a better description of it. Maybe there's,
So the multifamily is out towards the highway and the,
or maybe it's senior living, or maybe
Yeah.
it's,
which is pretty common.
Word
What?
Well, like little kids will hear things, but like older people tend to have bad hearing. I already do, so I can make fun of the hearing impaired since I'm already hearing impaired. But it's just like, yeah, who wants to hear that? Is there a way to put sound barriers? Or I see them sometimes, you know, in construction when interstates blow through neighborhoods. Sometimes they put up walls.
Yeah, I mean, I think then you're starting to get into the aesthetics of the city.
Yeah, you're going counter to the SWOT analysis
Yeah.
in a big way, because everything was about
Well, I can tell you,
aesthetics.
living right here, I live on Mill Street, so I live right in the central city. And when the woods were taken down for the woods of Delafield, the noise level in my neighborhood absolutely quintupled. It's astonishing. And if the wind's blowing out of the south, it's pretty awful, you know. So it detracts from the quality of life. And, you know, I'm just living there. So I'm just wondering, do we want to plant things along there or just something to consider?
It'd be berms and arborvitae's,
Right.
basically.
But again, I think that goes to the landscape planning and the,
Yeah,
you know, the
that's-
site planning when that comes into play.
And you've got, like,
Yeah.
this
Something
whole-
that just sucks in that noise.
This whole 83 corridor is interesting because you have sewer and water, you've got commercial on the east side, and then you've got residential, lower density residential on the west side in the city of Delafield. So it really is an appropriate area to transition from 83 to the residential to the west, whether that be mixed use, which includes commercial, or high density residential, and then you phase into low density residential. I think they both work. If it were residential, I think Jackie berming and landscaping and having nice thick buffers is a very good idea. If it's a commercial on I-83, then it's probably not as important.
So the restrictions on commercial with the pact with Heartland, does that extend to like retail commercial or?
It's only as far as I can tell, and I know, Mayor, correct me if I'm wrong, because you have maybe a more current document or complete document. The only area that's really, really restricted is this Nagawicca Dairy property, which I think we're talking about coming up. On the east side.
The Geeson Farm.
Yeah,
The
East-
John
yeah.
Geeson Farm.
East side of 83.
okay.
The west side of 83, it needs review, but it doesn't, I couldn't find any restrictions regarding the use.
Okay.
So any other, I've got conservation subdivision as a default so far. I didn't really get clear direction on density or whether or not transition is acceptable in use and/or density.
You know, I think if you look at the demographics we're trying to solve as well as taxes, I mean, the aging of people in Delafield. A lot of our kids want to live here and they can't afford to. I think density is a generic term, I think is appropriate. You know, tasteful density, what you suggested, Amy, makes sense, but I think you can do conservation with tasteful density. So that's kind of how I think about it.
And are you all leaning toward residential, residential only?
I think,
Anyone?
personally, I don't think residential or residential only, but I think it kind of makes sense to have a transition down that corridor. And from what we've been talking about, maybe that makes sense to start the transition, you know, maybe from the church going north as residential transitioning into more of a mixed use and then maybe more of an industrial. And I guess to the point of that particular piece of property, I know back in my golf development days, flat cornfields were always the preferred method. You didn't have the DNR issues and the, you know, tree destruction, and there was an opportunity to really transform what is basically a flat piece of property there. So to me, that just makes sense for a higher density, and I won't say what that density is, but a higher density residential, and then transitioning as you go north.
And you know,
Amy, I mean, I think your idea of also sort of transitioning from 83 west makes a certain amount of sense. If there are, I mean, I'm not sure I would frankly care if there was an opportunity to do that it would be commercial moving maybe into higher density residential into more higher density but less dense, as you move west. I think that would make a lot of sense. But, to me, the bulk of this, like, 2 large parcels here is, let's put some homes in there. That seems to me to be.
Or you're tucked between a park and a river, so it's perfect
Right.
place.
And residential on the west side too, right? I mean,
Well, and I do think it makes sense to consider the adjacent lots to the highway corridor as being, multifamily or a more dense residential use. It's pretty common, and I get it, there's a highway there and there's going to be noise, but I mean, drive through any of the, Chicago suburban, neighborhoods, and that's pretty much what you're seeing at a lot more intense densities than we have here. And so, I mean, that would just seem to make sense.
So, Craig, when you were talking about using the church as a transition point, so this property is north of the church. So having the ability to have the mixed-use commercial on the highway would be acceptable from this point going north. But, and
Well,
then transitioning to
again, I'm not
lower
still-
density residential.
Yeah, I'm
west.
still not clear on exactly your definition of mixed
Mixed
use
use.
commercial.
And when I say mixed use, I'm just saying as an option. It doesn't mean it has to be done, but to allow pretty much an extension of Walnut Ridge type use along 83 and then transitioning into higher density residential, then transitioning into your low density residential to then,
Yeah, I think
match
in
up to
general,
that
as you
adjacent.
transition north and west, the densities would, from a housing
Go.
standpoint, decrease
Yeah.
as you headed west. And then the commercial, whatever that means,
yes.
would increase as you headed north.
In north of Bark River?
Yeah, well, again,
Just keep
I'm not
going
even
now.
trying to define north right now. I'm just
Right.
saying in general, you've got
And
you got
like
residential
toward
down
80
here, and you've got,
16.
if you did your absolute points, the far northeast corner would be the highest industrial / commercial use. The far south, what would it be, southwest corner would be the prime residential, and your transition zone would be all the way in between that. And how that actually laid out, I don't know
Yeah.
that we want to get into that much detail.
Yeah,
but-
I mean, that's an interesting recommendation is when we were talking about that special use land use category, you could take this entire block, including this lot, Lake Country, Sela, and Morris, include all of it and just talk about the transition from 83 west, north, and along the river. You don't want to pack them in close to the river in order to protect those resources, so.
And again, that
Depending.
allows flexibility as development proposals come to the table. Maybe a development proposal shifts itself a little bit south and okay, well, we'll consider that because it kind of fits the general
Sure.
goal there.
Okay. Any other comments on this? Anyone? Okay, hold on.
Is there a comfort level with that from everybody? Kind of a consensus?
Yeah, I think so.
You guys all feel good about that?
We don't really know what the density looks like yet, but
But decreasing as you go westward is basically what I hear. 83 being the highest density.
Yeah.
and I think we're all saying too, I think this is an area where there's an opportunity to have higher, even the lower density part, maybe higher density than in other parts of the city, right?
Yeah.
Probably not 2 acre lots.
yeah. Well, and this is the area that's served by sewer and water. It doesn't get better than
Yeah.
this for development.
Yeah.
Most communities don't have this opportunity, so, I mean, once these agricultural fields are developed, they're developed and you lose that
Well,
chance.
and I think
So-
even if you look at this corridor, even extending north of Highway 16 and what's happening in other communities there, I know as you go north, a lot of the hilltop up there, isn't that Heartland's got, I think, quarter acre, half acre zoned up there, and again, sewer and water. I just don't think you can squander that on the higher densities if you're looking towards, tax revenue down the road.
And you're not going to get it. I mean, if it doesn't make economic sense, nobody's going to.
Yeah,
Otherwise, it'd be done already.
Yep.
Okay. Are we prepared to move on? All right.
So Amy, out of this, our recommendations eventually will be to make zoning changes to those areas when they transition.
Land use plan.
Zoning and land use changes, yep. You'd start with the big picture land use and then identify zoning changes, which may or may not fit in the existing code. So,
Right.
it's all kind of open-ended at this point. Okay, so the next area is just a little bit further south. So now we're south of the church. We're getting into a more residentially used and occupied zone. But we have these properties owned by JAG, 2 LLC, and then that straddle 83. So if you look at your paper map, I can't really highlight it on GIS because it's like 4 parcels here.
It's 161 and 160, those are the dots?
Actually, yeah, 161, 160, and 138. So there were two different maps here. So that's why you're seeing 138, 161, and 160.
And what were the comments on those?
So the comments were, this is what I was doing when I was preparing for the meeting, and I didn't have these maps in front of me. 138, it says office as a possible use. 162, or I'm sorry. See, now we're on
We
map.
have 161 and
One-
160.
160 is medium density residential. The 160, that has to be or no retail is allowed. So that's probably limited to more of a residential use. And 161, I do not have on my sheet.
Can you
Does anyone know?
pull up, there's 2 more farms there. There's the one right there, and then there's this one south of Nagawicka Road.
These two, and I wanted to bring this up anyway, these 2 properties have come up for discussion. I've gotten a few calls on the two properties, north and south, on Oakwood.
What does it show for owner on that? Is it still Geeson? So, it's
Joe's
Joe
Legacy
Geeson, the Joe
Farm.
Geeson farm.
I'm not sure if they're on the market or they're just inquiring, but that has,
Kind of.
okay.
I think you're gonna
Wanting
see
to know
some
how many lots can be
inquiries on that.
created.
No, there's a wonderful view from up there.
Does anyone want to claim tag 161 and tell me what they had? I'm not sure why it's not coming up on my list. Anyone?
As far as who tagged it originally, or?
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if I kept record.
It doesn't matter. I mean, because we can talk about it now. And right now I've got office on the west side, and then on the east side, medium density residential.
My question would be, for Tom, since we have water along 83, would you be required on those 2 parcels to connect to water.
Are we talking about 161?
Nope, the one to the southwest of that, and then the one across Nagawicka Road. Amy's got it highlighted here on the screen.
Yeah, I mean, given the proximity, I'm sure the city would generally feel that that would be connected to sewer and water.
Okay. Because the issue there is obviously the grades go down probably 80 to 100 feet in that area. So keep that in mind, that whatever water goes in there would be expensive water to install, because you'd have to probably put a booster pump in there.
Well, likewise for the well situation though, too. You know, you'd go from 30 to 80 foot wells to probably.
Well, you wouldn't have wells.
No, but I'm just
Well,
saying, if you
wells.
didn't do water,
You could.
you're going to burden either the lot owner or in one way or another with infrastructure cost. Isn't does the topography drop on the north lot to the north? It drops down?
There's kind of a rise to the west, and then it drops off.
Yeah, okay, so
It looks flatter on that topo than it really is.
That's because it's so steep. These are, I
Those
guess
are
they're
10s.
5-foot
they
contours. You have to zoom in pretty far to get to the,
So that northwest corner of the top of the screen there, you can see it's like
it's almost unbuildable.
it's like an amphitheater.
Yeah.
It would be a challenging spot to build.
Perfect for a band shell already, huh? It's already got
Yeah.
I'm sure the neighbors in Oakwood Farm would love that.
okay, any thoughts on,
The new Alpine Valley.
Ski hill, yeah.
Proposal there that was proposed and approved, it was just never built.
On 160?
Yeah.
So just real quick, 160 is subject to restrictions in the corridor compact agreement with the Village of Heartland and the town of Delafield. It is required to be residential. I don't know, Amy, did you cover this already? Or?
we talked about it at the last meeting.
Okay.
Yeah.
It does allow the opportunity to get a little bit more dense as you move west on the property. And the last approval did include condominiums along Highway 83. And then as you moved east towards the town of Delafield, the single-family residential lots got gradually larger until along the boundary they kind of matched the property sizes in the town.
There are no road connections to the town in that plan, correct?
That's correct.
So
Yeah, and I was looking at this, there, I don't think there's any practical connection to the town.
no,
There is a weird strip somewhere in here, but it,
down on KE and 83, there's an area that they had reserved for multifamily at one time. Nothing's happened.
what's the strip? Oh, I'm thinking of this strip up here. There's this strip that almost looks like it would be intended for
Well,
a
that's
road
steep.
extension, but it's actually, yeah, it's owned by the homeowners of the subdivision.
The aerial photograph seems to, is that a road?
No, right here?
It might have been an old farm road.
Like on this picture,
It's probably kind of a spite. Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah, it almost shows the white line looks like a road.
Yeah, I thought that was a property line or something. That's why I asked that question, was because of that line.
I don't know why that's.
I didn't think there was a road there.
And is that the Ice Age
I
trail
don't even know
that
why that would.
curves along the eastern border of that property?
Yeah,
No.
it goes through those residential streets there.
It's farther east. It goes through Hawks Nest, and then it kind of winds through some of the streets.
It's not the
That
curved
could
property
actually
line.
be in there. I don't know. I'd have to look at it. A lot of the Ice Age Trail isn't complete, but there are corridors where it's been reserved.
So the zoning currently on that property is what?
I think it's
Which
B-
one? The,
Is it B6?
'cause we kinda added-
160.
160? So the
I think it's B6.
east side of the 83 is zoned R3
R3.
resident. There's a small little B6, that's the existing small triangular lot that I have my arrow on. But the rest of it is zoned R3, which is a higher density residential. What do I have here? Single and two-family residential, 20,000 square feet lot sizes. So for the city, that's actually more dense than what a lot of these lots are. But on the west side of 83, it's A1 agriculture.
Okay.
Minimum 3 acre. And the land use plan on the west side's agricultural as well. Land use plan on the east side is medium density residential, 4 units per acre.
Was there any indication as to why the proposed development didn't move forward on that?
I think it was just finances at the time. I think they might have gotten caught in the Great Recession time period.
It was about 2006 or 7, I think.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, I mean, is it not a viable piece in today's development environment?
Current owner
John?
doesn't really want it.
Really?
With sewer and water, that significantly increases the cost of development. So naturally, you, as a developer or landowner, you would want more density there to make it a viable project.
Amy, interestingly, when you look at the corridor compact agreement about the Nagawicka View Dairy, it says that's to be developed as single-family residential through the use of the city's B6 Commercial Holding District Ordinance.
Single family through the B6 ordinance?
That's what it says.
I don't
That's
think
How do you do that? Does B6 allow for any residential? Or is it a typo?
B6 is it's like a holding zone that you can do residential through a planned development in B6. So it is kind of a catch-all district, really.
Okay.
Is it in that one paragraph that talks about Nagawicka? I'm so used to Nagawaki Park.
Nagawicka View Dairy, yeah.
Nagawicka View Dairy, yeah.
Yep.
Well, it's not zone B6. That's interesting. It should be zone B6 then.
Maybe it was B6 back then.
Okay, any comments on, I guess let's start with use. Is residential the appropriate use for all of these ag fields in this area south of the church? Would you contemplate any commercial mixed use? Kind of break it down.
It would be a deviation from the general layout. You know, you're up on top of the hill, you really have no commercial as you head south or north on 83. It's not until you really drop into the, off the ridge of 83 that you get the industrial park. So it would change the character of, the overall layout a little bit if you were to have any type of commercial up on top there.
It's a pretty iconic view from the lake to the
Yeah.
Geeson Farm, so it'd be nice to make it a showplace kind of development. But you're going to need some density to make it viable. It can't just be 25,000 square foot lots or 30,000 square foot lots.
That might be a nice area for high-end condos because they're beautiful vistas of the lake. And again, I'm not an architect, but to build into the side of that hill.
So right now, all of the adjacent areas on the west side of the fields is in a 1 unit per 2 acre category. On the east side, it's in a medium density category. Are we sticking with residential though? I'm just trying to.
I'm thinking, yeah.
Yeah, west of,
Residential's the consensus.
I think so.
Density variable depending on where you are.
Variable leaning towards maybe a higher density. I mean, with with a walking trail system, you've got access to the park there, and I mean, that would seem like a great marriage.
Okay. Any other comments? Going once?
Is that on 161, or are we talking just the?
I think the whole area, it sounds like it's going to have to be a little bit more dense on the east side of 83 based on the B6 zoning classification. But it can't be commercial.
So the B6, you know, that's really interesting because the permitted uses in B6 are commercial and the residential is a conditional use. I doubt the town of Delafield, well, it says no commercial, so
Yeah. Did you
Yeah.
read this paragraph?
I did. I read it at the meeting
To the
last
group?
time.
You did?
Yeah.
Okay.
I don't remember the B6.
Because the
reference.
majority of it is intended to be complementary to the Foxwood Estates
Yeah.
lots.
Which was the plan for that
Yep.
last development. It was higher density along 83
Yep.
and then it got less
Yeah.
to
Yeah.
the east.
And these are, I looked at these last night, like one and a half, maybe 2 acre lots.
And a key element of, in the agreement of this property is the town of Delafield has actual approval authority over development on that property.
1 acre lots.
So can you share with us that agreement
The whole agreement?
or that part of it?
Yes.
We could put
I
the
don't want
whole,
to read the whole thing.
we could put the whole agreement on the website and highlight that section.
That would be helpful.
Yeah, we can put the whole agreement on there. There's one paragraph, I copied it, I'll copy that as a separate document too, so you don't have to read it. It's in, I think it's just in my notes from last meeting, I don't think it's in the minutes.
Is it the thought that the town is going to want a buffer of 1 acre lots along there, or would they accept a compromise of a lower density going to higher density, maybe something like a 3/4 acre or half acre along that buffer?
My recollection from their past approval, over 10 years ago, is that they definitely wanted like-sized lots immediately up against their lots, and then allowed it to get a little bit more dense as you moved west.
Towards 83.
You know, you could do one layer and then.
That's what it was.
Transition.
Yeah, that's how it was.
One layer of high density.
That's
Transition.
exactly what it
And
was.
then melt it over. What is the zoning in the town of Delafield there, next to the R3? Are those R3s
It's probably
also?
R1.
R1?
I think I can
That's
actually
all
tell
Seward
you.
up there, if I'm not mistaken.
It looks like B6 is just the Horvath
Where's the town?
building.
Yeah,
Just
that's
there, so,
it.
yeah.
Oh, here we go.
R1A.
R1A. It's a 1 acre, it's a 1 acre district.
And we have our zoned R3 right now, so.
I don't know what A3 is to the north.
No, that's a
Might be-
catch-all kind of thing too. A3 is probably 2 acre density.
Yeah. Or not 2 acre, it looks like a planned development a little bit.
So the transportation-wise, I think the only entrance there is right at Nagawicka Road. Is that right, Tom? I think that's all you could fit in there because of site distance and grades and.
I don't remember.
That's what I recall, but
Well, and there's a lot of
It's a long
broken
time ago.
parcels though, so, it would be interesting to find out more because normally they have to give you 1 access per lot, but then when you join them as a development, that changes things, so.
That would make sense, though. The
Tricky
site
area.
distance would be a significant issue on either side of that hill.
I'm sure they wouldn't let you have
It-
more than or less than 500 feet between intersections.
Yeah.
No. Are you talking about right here, coming across?
Yes, and then there's the parcel where it connects to 83 to the south, right between those two little teeth that stick up to the north a little bit. Nope, on that same parcel. right? Now go south, there. I don't think that's enough distance there to get another entrance, but.
Yeah, we can find a copy of what was approved.
Who owns these? I mean, they might, you know, force these people to
Unrelated.
come off of a different road. Okay, so residential only, variable density. Benefits next to adjacent park. Match immediate use, match Delafield development density, right? Anything else? I think at the next meeting, when we vote on some of these properties, we probably want to get a little more specific with density because right now the city's ordinance doesn't have a lot of options for variability and mixing things up. So it would be helpful to understand, so just maybe think about what level of density. And if you're talking about condos, going back to your question about, well, what does that mean? Do you want 16, 24 unit condos or townhouse style condos, 4 to 8 units? I would just think about how much is palatable. Any other discussion on this property?
Going once, going twice.
Listen,
All right, now we're in the southeast quadrant.
you just give it a 10-minute boost.
Okay, so this one was
Way down
not,
near the town hall.
this was not tagged by you all. You all. But,
It's farther east.
where am I?
Straight
I'm
east.
getting tired.
Keep going. It's right, oh, center.
I do work here, so I should probably know where it is. Okay, so this is the, what is known as the SEH property south of 94 and west of Maple Avenue. The property's been recently sold, and I've had a couple meetings with the new owners and developers. And they are interested in really maxing out the density here. But they're flexible with what they would construct. So ideally, I think they want to pack in as many apartments as possible. And they talked about mixed use, commercial, being willing to be flexible. The only thing I'll say is if you've never been out here, it is a steep driveway, so getting too heavy duty on commercial would be challenging. It's unfortunate because Kettle Court East is just to the west of this, and that is an industrial park, and this property really is secluded. And you've got the town hall directly to the east, and other than that, I believe Ben Askren, who owns the property to the south, I guess we'll find out how he feels, but I think he's been talking to them. And then you have the gun club, and then industrial to the west. So it's a good property to do something with. It doesn't really have a lot of negative implications to adjoining lands.
So is the entryway off Maple and not? Or does
It's
it
off
come
Maple.
off of that?
There's
Drive?
there's only one entrance off of Maple. The area between Hillside and the development does get pretty steep. I don't know
Yeah.
if there's any opportunity to grade that differently or not, but as far as I can tell, it's pretty steep.
Yeah, I thought that. I didn't think that.
So, I mean, obviously this one has a developer that's already got some ideas, but it just feels, I mean, we're a good chunk of the way through this, and we're not, I don't know how many other industrial options we're gonna come up with, and we all agree that we'd wanna see a little
Try to
more
find one.
industrial. It seems like this is a perfect candidate for that.
It's a good one, but it's steep. To be honest with you, I work there, and I'm not sure my car would get up the drive. I think it's my justification for a new vehicle this winter. It's pretty steep.
So the footprint of like a big industrial would be problematic.
I'm
as you would
thinking
be.
like all the trucks that may have to come and go
Yeah,
and
that's a good
loading
point.
zones.
It
I
would have
don't,
to be, it would have to be a mass grading project to make it really work industrially.
Do you know what level of income, price point apartments they had talked about?
I don't. What I can tell you is that it's my understanding that they will be higher end, but they want a lot of them, so probably smaller in footprint size.
People want to live like backing up to that, all that other stuff.
Well, so
Apparently
this
they think
property has a gorgeous view of Pewaukee Lake.
Ah, okay.
I mean, there's some traffic noise, but it really does have a gorgeous view.
Plus, think about all those industrial users to the west and commercial users to the west that need people.
True.
And that's where you want them, where they can walk.
Yeah, so
bike.
this, it's an interesting area because you've got the whole Gulf Road development, what do you call it, Shops of Nagawicca. And then you've got the Delafield Brew House, Home Depot, stuff along there. I mean, it really is not a bad place to bring population to the area. A lot of those stores are desperate for employees. I know my daughter just started at Home Depot and they needed to hire 50 people.
Would the density be similar to, there's that, is it a senior apartment behind Tires Plus back in there?
Yeah, there is.
Yeah, there is.
Yep.
Yeah, I would say that that would be similar.
Is that similar to what,
The style,
well, not
What-
even the style, I'm just saying the density.
the density, I think what they want is large buildings at the highest density possible. So I did talk to them. It's zoned B for general business, which allows business uses. So it would require an amendment to the zoning. It is planned for planned mixed use. So I talked to them about the B6 category, which is the gun club in Askren happens to be B6, which is the two properties to the south. I think they can fit, if they did zone it and the city approved B6, I think their development that they're proposing would work under those provisions.
Amy, can you show me the gun club? Where would that be in relation?
And that would be, assuming all residential, I think they might want to, well, no, B6 would allow mixed use too. I think they want to keep the building for at least some period of time and add residential in front of it.
Do we know how many units are in that unit, the one behind Tires Plus?
I don't.
I mean, I've never driven in there, I've just seen it from the street, and it looks like a pretty good sized block of building back there.
Pretty good size, yeah.
I'll highlight the gun club property.
And that's 3
Here.
stories,
Yeah,
senior unit. Well, the good thing about multifamily on that site is that they can really step it down those grades and make it work versus, industrial. I just don't see.
Yeah.
You need it pan flat for that. And then that's your industrial hub right there. That's the most concentrated industrial use you have in the city, isn't it? Pretty close.
What's really unfortunate about the industrial use is there's the landfill to the west, which is just such a nice big block of land, but has a lot of liability tied to it, but directly south of Home Depot. Anyway, going back to the SEH, does anyone object to the idea of B6 as a potential option moving forward? I think having that, whatever not of approval, I know you're not the decision body, might help the developer move forward.
B6 also includes corporate office, right?
Yep, so there's several business uses allowed in B6, and then residential is allowed through a planned development, conditional use, so they would need a conditional use. I mean, you could also allow it by right if you wanted to change, or recommend a change in category altogether.
how
but-
much of an impediment to the developer would the conditional use, and are we talking months, or?
So with a planned development, there's a general, yes, there's a general development plan and a specific implementation plan, and there's a public hearing tied to it. on something like this where it's a single site, I mean, maybe they could do all of that in, I mean, it probably realistically would be 6 months, maybe more.
I'm just not sure if it's an appropriate site for either or. Why throw an impediment in front of the developer to do it?
If
Yeah,
someone
I
could
don't
make it
know.
industrial, go for it. But if it's better for residential, it's a great spot.
Well, and
to
again, I
take
think
advantage of
industrial
the
is kind of out of the question, but I mean, if somebody wanted to come in and put an office building up with gorgeous views of Pewaukee,
Yeah.
great. Or if they want to do a similar building with apartments with gorgeous views of Pewaukee, I don't see the difference in that from a standpoint of zoning. So I would say, again, not knowing what it would have to be, but.
I think the only thing would be, and we might need to do this anyway, based on your comments on a lot of those other properties, there may need to be a mixed-use zoning district where those uses are allowed by right. Because here, it's close. It's a commercial holding district, but the residential uses require the conditional use.
Well, and again, I think you've got the precedent set. I don't want to keep referring to the unit behind Tires Plus, but you've got that precedent set in that district already to have the residential in there, so.
Were they constructed with a waiver or a conditional use permit or what?
What's that?
The senior apartments behind Tires Plus, were they zoned or was it a conditional
I'm
use?
sure that's a
Does
conditional
anybody know?
use. Almost every
I'm just curious because I think
senior
you're
center
right.
that's-
Yeah.
I believe it's a conditional use. I don't know exactly the process or density out there. I would have to look.
Yeah, I don't either. Just, it's a good question.
It's, I believe it's in the B6 district too, so similar to what this would be.
Can we just look at, before you move on, what is the future plan for the landfill?
It's just has, well, Tom knows the landfill property the best.
Landfill.
The homeowner is like missing, right? Or not missing, but nobody can reach him.
There's a several $1 million lien against the property.
Okay.
With the DNR coming in and running the operations of the methane burn-off and whatnot. The owner has disappeared and the DNR has chosen not to pursue legal action against the owner to this point.
You can buy it for $1, but then you get all the land.
So it's virtually dead space.
Could be a super fund. Can we get super fund money?
In the past, and it's been several years, there was a developer or two that was pitching some program with the state where the city can acquire it but doesn't acquire the liability associated with it, and then they can lease it to developers. But he was going to look into that and have conversations with our city attorney, but it never went anywhere. So
The city of St. Francis did that with a fly ash pit down on the lakefront, and they turned it into a park. And We Energies has the liability on it, and the city can develop it. They can't. There's obviously limitations to how it can be developed, but at one time there was a college that was going to buy the St. Francis Seminary and expand into that area, and it actually worked really well. It never happened, but it was all planned out to happen that way.
And I know the one developer that came in a while ago and was looking at it, he was contemplating, his plan was self-storage units and a golf driving range.
How much acreage are we talking for this piece?
What is the acreage that Amy?
47.
Amy, can you?
47.
47?
Of this of the landfill is
40.
How much methane is it producing? Can you get a power plant in there?
It's good
It
acreage.
could be a net zero,
Not
first
bad.
net zero property in Delafield.
I mean, I was involved in a project down at one in Naperville, and they have a small turbine, and they're piping the methane into it, and
Right now, the DNR is just burning the methane off.
Okay.
Yeah. I want to say it was probably 15 years ago, there was a big box retailer that looked at it as well, and I think it might have been a Menards. And they were looking at a ventilation system where they'd vent the methane up through their roof, but explosion concerns were an issue, and they went away.
hard enough getting employees as it is. Right?
Plus, you got to make sure the floor is floating on just the right amount of structure. I'm just curious because 47 acres is no small piece of property, and it's green space. I'm sure people that live there walk on it, take their risk and walk on it, but
You know?
Did you already say there was I feel like there was like mini storage, there's been landscaping proposals.
Yeah,
I
more
mean,
more often than
people-
not, what do landfills eventually get developed as? Parks,
Golf courses,
recreation, walking paths, bike paths.
Yeah, you don't want to dig into it.
Well, the site is subsiding, isn't it? I mean, like most landfills?
Yeah.
It shrinks inches a year?
Yeah, and another issue with it is that from the DNR's perspective, the existing cap on the landfill is substandard, and any developer would be responsible for significantly increasing the cap at a significant cost.
that's a huge expense. Okay. I think my questions are answered.
You're not interested.
Could be a cool sledding hill
If
in
we
there
do
too.
really ultra-high density in one part, maybe it'll offset the tax needs. This one. Never mind.
Can you, city move the Frisbee golf over there and you can develop the other park?
There you go. I like it.
That's a good idea.
Okay,
All right, now we're on to the Highway C-94
yes.
intersection.
Let's see if I can find this one. Okay, there we go. Okay, so this property includes several separate lots. The total acreage is about 26.7 acres. The land use plan category is office. The zoning is B5, office and research commercial. Sewer services are available, but the lot would be served by private well. The access would be provided by Indian Spring Drive, and I think the applicants that have been pursuing the property are considering whether or not relocating Indian Spring Drive can be accomplished to provide a safer distance from 94. So right now, we do have 4 stickers on the property, and they include suggesting medical office, commercial office, potentially connect a road to downtown or provide a connection from the road to downtown. I don't know right now, are there any sidewalks that go over the bridge?
No.
They stop?
Well, just on the bridge.
On the bridge and then they stop?
Are there plans for the replacement of that freeway bridge anytime? That seems to be the only one on I-94 between here and Madison that hasn't been.
The DOT does talk about it fairly frequently, but it's not on any current schedule.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then someone else pointed out mixed use.
So what's the, I mean, there's a proposal, what's the current status of the?
I don't know, Tom, do you want to add? I don't know exactly where they're at. The road relocation is of one concern. I would say that the medical office development that was pursued, how long, so this started before I started here, but that's still being considered. COVID has played a role in how it's going to develop, and I think they're just probably working out all of those components. In a hotel is still something that was mentioned at a meeting. I don't know if that will be proposed or not, but something that you may want to talk about here.
Is anything developed on Tomahawk Trail at this time?
Where's Tomahawk
That's
Trail?
that little cul-de-sac
No.
there.
No.
Nothing. So is everything owned, is all of that vacant land owned by one party?
Yes.
Yeah.
So it's all owned by Rock River Property Holdings.
Which I believe is Exonia State Bank.
Right. Correct. Have you talked with MSI, or has there been
Yeah,
any communication?
MSI has told us real recently that the main group involved in the development proposal is once again coming out of COVID and gaining some interest in starting to pursue the project again.
And except
it-
for the hotel, it's it's zoned correctly, what they're
That's-
proposing.
That's correct.
Right.
Right, so when, commercial office, medical office, that all fits the existing zoning. So we probably don't need to talk about that a whole lot. The mixed use, I mean, if you wanted to talk about that more, that would not fit with the B5 zoning. And then, I think we could certainly point out that it would be nice to connect this side of the highway, in particular this area, to downtown.
So Amy, the proposal that was made included independent living, assisted living, and memory care living. Does that fit the existing land use and zoning?
Independent, like what do you mean by independent living?
Independent senior living,
Senior living?
yeah.
No, just assisted living.
It's a bunch of, can't read it. You said it's B5. Is it all B5? All
Yes,
B5.
sorry,
Yep.
I'm multitasking here. I'm looking at B5. Maybe, I know Tom doesn't like it when I do this, but when I search B5, it'll come up a bunch of different ways, so I always have to scroll through here. Be nice if each zoning district was indexed. B1, getting there, B2, B3, B4, B5, office and research commercial. Well, other uses similar to the above, which are all commercial related. Clinics, hospitals, and medical laboratories. I thought somehow it was being tied to the fact that it was like associated with the medical facility, but
I mean, it's a business,
Some of the,
and not so much a hospital, but medical buildings.
some of the assisted living centers are now incorporating clinics.
Is what?
A clinic within their
Oh, okay.
buildings, I guess.
Yeah, but you need a lot of density for that.
Say that again?
You need a lot of people
Yeah.
living there to support a
Oh,
clinic.
yeah, for a clinic, yeah,
Yes.
and assisted living. I know that, like memory care, my mom's in a memory care unit, and, well, she was, now she's in skilled nursing, but when she was in the memory care, I cannot get the post office to forward her mail because it is considered, the memory care unit is considered a business. And it's it's crazy. They still, like, almost a year later, are hand forwarding things to my, so yeah, the zoning is nuts.
so Tom, I think the senior living in the northeast corner of the city by Pick and Save, that was called a business, a commercial business, but I think we should look at that closer and possibly, at least as part of this group, either support or not support the associated residential component to the medical facilities would be helpful, because maybe we do want to change some things. I don't know, we'll have to look at it more closely.
I think that makes sense with some of the recent discussions involving, the senior living, and that this puts it in proximity to the downtown. So if there ever is a bridge or pedestrian access added to there, you've got that, you're close to the freeway, so you have really good access to hospitals, a few interchanges down. I mean, it just makes a lot of sense that if it is going to be medical or oriented, that maybe there is some sort of senior component to the site as well.
What's the acreage? on this?
27 acres.
27.
Yep.
So are you talking, Greg, like Azura, that kind of facility.
I'm not familiar with that.
Oh, they're building all over. I don't know if they're memory care or if they're elderly housing, the Azuras. There's one on Capitol, there's one in Fox Point, they're all over the place. I thought that might be what you referred to.
I'm thinking if you've got a 27-acre campus, you have, opportunity for medical offices there, maybe a clinic, a walk-in or emergency clinic, and then just a general healthcare campus type thing. And if that included a residential component for senior care, I think that would make sense as well. Again,
MSI
that would be up to
was-
the developer.
They had something that had to do with, but that wasn't senior care. I think it was assisted living. That's what it
Well, a
was.
lot of these places will have independent senior apartments with transition to assisted living or memory care with transition to SNFs or skilled nursing facilities.
Right.
So that people can kind of,
Yeah.
Yes.
What's that?
The one down the road is like that in Oconomowoc off of
They're all
67,
over.
across from the hospital, is exactly that.
Again, I think keeping the zoning broad enough where that, we can't predict, what the next trend in that healthcare is going to be. It would make sense
Yeah.
that if you have the size of a campus, you could start combining those elements. And if that's, you basically accommodate, an unknown future through
And
not
what is that
restricting the
and
zoning
since
too
we've
much.
talked about the aging of Delafield, we
Yeah.
can all move in there soon.
Very,
We'll start picking our
very
spot.
good possibility.
isn't
And then
that
there
more
won't be a lot
brought in
of
by
cost
the
of services
developer,
to the
too?
city, because all you
Pardon?
have to
It's
do is
brought in
stroll
by
you
the
the
developer.
house
Yeah.
clinic.
Yeah.
But I think
Across
that's a
the new
really good
bridge.
They
suggestion.
would kind of drive
Yeah,
which
of
way it's
course.
going.
And again, it's all about, if it's appropriate, why restrict the use? Why make it harder to jump through?
Start with the trolley.
Again, if it's appropriate for a particular site or
Well, then that might be a
Or the
good,
neighborhood.
yeah, a good fit for the concern addressed in some of the earlier survey, and that is senior opportunity, senior living. That might be a good spot, especially if there's going to be medical stuff there. That's a good idea.
Okay. Do you want to discuss the possibility of a hotel at all?
A what?
So it came up at a meeting when the application came through, and it was going to be a potential text amendment or what have you was going to be brought forward as a separate meeting, and then the project was put on hold. So it may or may not come up again.
It just feels like such a project-specific issue. I'm just not sure it's worth a lot of.
Okay.
I can't hear you, David.
Yeah, louder.
Sorry,
Let
screw up.
let
Speaking to
it.
the mic.
We just said it's so project specific that it may not be worth discussing here, and that would mean essentially letting them come up and give their pitch to see how it flies, right?
I don't think it's bad to talk about the possibility of a hotel use there. It could be a marquee place. A hotel doesn't have to be an ugly thing. It can be it could have some interest. It could be a point of interest as people pass along down 94.
I think as a self-standing hotel, that's one discussion. I'm familiar with the development you're talking about because I watched the Plan Commission meetings. And to your point, and I'm going from recollection, their primary focus was something different than a hotel, and they were going to have, making up the number, a 3-story attached building, which I do think is more of a site-specific versus Hilton wants to put in a 6-story standalone hotel.
Yeah,
Was the intent to serve like the visitors of the
Yes.
site? Is that what?
That was, but it was oversized for their intent. And I'm real familiar with this development. The pushback from the neighbors will be huge against a hotel.
Okay.
Well, and I think you've got a unique consideration there. If Delafield has a front door and a back door, that is kind of the front door of Delafield, with maybe 83 being the back door. And, you've got kind of a gorgeous entranceway into to the city in that. And again, without, you certainly don't want to see a freeway-style hotel development on that corner. I
And
just
it's
think,
not zoned for it anyway.
yeah.
Yeah.
No Quick Trip. So
Maybe it's more.
aesthetics are paramount.
Yeah, I would say absolutely.
Maybe it's pitched, if they're trying to get those visitors in, something like visitor housing for medical facility. I mean,
That was
it's not.
originally true, right?
was-
And then
yeah,
it got
that's how it
bigger
was
as it
originally.
went
Okay.
on.
That's how it's pitched, yeah.
You know, because I feel like that doesn't necessarily have to be considered a hotel if it's done right, but.
Well, I mean, I think the Plan Commission was talking about doing something like a Ronald McDonald type house, things
Yeah,
like that.
that's what I'm thinking.
But that's not what the applicant is pursuing. The applicant made it clear that it would be predominantly for people visiting their loved ones that were staying in the micro hospital or the assisted living or whatnot, but that to make it viable, that it did need to be open to the public as well.
And I don't know, John, if you know this at all, but when we had met with the Citizens for Responsible Growth, there was a comment mentioned about how the Delafield Hotel sometimes has to pass, or people pass up having weddings there because there's not enough places to stay in the direct area. And so they were kind of excited about this possibility of having a hotel because you're bringing people and keeping them in the downtown environment versus sending them to 83 and 94, which is a different commercial corridor. You know, when people stay there, they're probably gonna shop there. People in the downtown area are gonna probably shop downtown. So that did come up. I don't know if that's a real issue or not, but
In addition to
lack
that,
of hotel space.
I think we would welcome another developer to build a hotel in Delafield to the same caliber. We're not going to promote a flagged hotel or a Holiday Inn on the freeway, but another boutique hotel we would probably promote.
And John, to your point, I think it's an aesthetics issue, and then it's a pedestrian, you know, there's that cost of services. If you have a gathering point on the opposite side of the freeway, you will have pedestrian traffic migrating across that. And now you've got the on-ramps to deal with and the bridge. I don't even know what the sidewalks are like on there, but so again, it's just a consideration. What are the costs involved in upgrading the pedestrian access to the downtown from across the freeway?
The other possible fit with a higher-end hotel is it's right down the street from Lapham Peak
Yeah.
Park. And I can tell you in the wintertime, this past winter, they've closed the parking lots. I've run into people there from Madison and all over the place coming there to cross-country ski. So, I mean, that is a draw. It's a regional draw.
just from, as far as the case that MSI made, they said that their market research does show a hotel room deficit in the city of Delafield and a need for additional hotel. And then, with the concern for the compatibility with the surrounding land uses, with residential and whatnot, they expressed a willingness to make it, no restaurant, no bar, no banquet facilities, things like that.
So Jerry, I have a question since you live near here, right?
Me?
Jerry, no, I'm
Yeah.
sorry, yes. So I was staring at Ken. You have, can you see, if a hotel was put in here, I really don't understand the topography out here that well. Is it visible to the surrounding residential areas? Because I would assume that there wouldn't necessarily be a traffic issue because people are gonna come on and off C and come directly into Indian Spring. But is it a visual concern?
There's people here that are much closer to it, but Bar Road, people don't realize how many homes are down off of Lapham Spring. I think there's 60-some parcels. There's a lot of homes built down there, and it ties into the town of Delafield as well. So the people who bump right up against this property had a promise made by the city years ago, I think, when Ed Mackler was mayor, or even before that, that it would be medically related, office, research, And that's why a hotel is not even in that zone. If you remember, it wasn't Aurora years ago talking about that property. Scully, the gas station, was talked about in that property. That's why the agreement was made to these residents.
Like a legal agreement?
Huh?
A legal agreement?
Not sure if it's legal, but it was in the.
Jim Barron's was in the air.
Who would, Jim Barrett? Jim Barrett.
Okay, well, any parting comments on this particular issue, or we're kind of going back and forth?
It looks
with
like it's
how-
zoned appropriately, except for the questions around a
Hotel.
hotel.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Well, and we got to look into the living piece of it, but
All right.
no
more comments?
comments on the hotel? Are you putting any recommendations one way or the other, or letting it be vetted through whatever application process comes in?
Yeah, it's so
Application.
site-specific, and it isn't, like, there isn't enough information to really, have an opinion until they.
I mean, it
it's
is a
just
little-
really dicey issue.
And it's both controversial
It
and
actually
it's very
is,
project
yeah.
specific. I mean, no one would have looked at that development and said, oh, well, let's put a hotel right, right there. It's only because of that project plan that we're even talking about it. So it
Okay.
just feels too specific to me and too controversial.
Okay,
It's going to make it tough for whoever comes in here, no matter who it is or what they're proposing, to get anything on that corner. I've lived through, I wasn't here, but I watched, I don't know, probably 6 different proposals on that property, and every single one of them failed. So really, what would be okay there? You're all looking at this like, well, I'm okay with a medical office, but I'm not okay with a hotel. What's the big difference? A medical office probably has 4 times the traffic that a hotel does.
Not 24/7.
Yeah, not on the weekend, so John.
But you have, I mean, this committee is here to talk about economic development. Here is, as Craig put it, the back door or the front door to the city. I think that maybe we should just come back to this next week, but I think there should be, it's my feeling that there should be some direction here on this. And maybe it's not as specific as we're thinking about. We've just talked about residential and a little higher residential, maybe mixed residential. Maybe it's something to that effect, but at least something. To just leave it for the wolves to chew on is a really
well,
scary
I think
thing.
though, John, a lot of the comments that were tagged, it's already permitted by right. So medical office came up, commercial office came up, it's already permitted by right. Office, again, came up, already permitted by right. Mixed use came up, that's not necessarily permitted by right. I mean, we got to look at the assisted living has been interpreted as a business use in the past. So I guess the only other thing then to really discuss is whether or not mixed use is appropriate, where somebody could throw in or only do residential. I mean, because then you would need a zoning district change. There is I don't know what this cul-de-sac was originally built for.
There was a home there
Okay,
that Lang built, and then it was vacated and eventually burnt down by the city fire department, I believe.
But the road was put there because of DOT wanting to change the
Entrance.
entrance to Indian Springs to put it further south. So Lane put that in there, thinking that when he developed, he would put this road, Indian Springs Road, further south.
It never got developed, really.
okay. So those could all be single family. I don't know if
Is
that's.
there a reason, I mean, does anybody know, is there a reason why that's never, I mean, I've heard this, I've heard lots of talk about this parcel too, and there's never been a residential idea. Is there a
No,
reason for
you're
that?
right about
Well,
that. There hasn't.
Because
Lang had the idea, but never went anywhere with it.
Dave, most prominently, there's not sewer there, and so you'd be 1 unit per 5 acres without sewer.
Yeah, good point.
So whoever develops that, if they do an office, are they going to be required to connect to sewer?
Well, so I thought this area did have to connect to sewer.
Yes.
What's that?
I thought this area did have to connect to
Well, a
sewer.
residential development's not going to be sufficient
Oh.
enough to pay for the $1 million
Got it.
sewer extension.
So that's going to really limit this to a higher density user. There's no question.
It's very wet though.
And it's, so I just put on the map too, there are pocket wetlands.
But there's still a
Which make a
significant
couple
amount of
lots.
property there that's
There's more.
available for development.
Oh, yeah.
It's pretty wet. I mean, a lot of the water coming from the west heads towards Nagawicca and Frog Hollow. So there's some swampy areas and there's some low areas.
Are those slopes that are red?
There, the red area is showing, these are showing, soil categories. So those are good soils. I can go to the slopes. But that HMD2, that might be poor soil. Well, it's Hockheim. I don't know what DT is. Drummer.
I mean, the road Indian
Poorly drained,
Springs
high
was for a
runoff.
reason. There was a lot of.
Yeah. You just didn't come up with a cute
Right.
name, right?
Topography. Let's just go.
The proposals that have come through on that property, have they included substantial buffers between the residential and the development?
MSI
or-
did a nice job.
They
Right.
built them
I mean,
in.
the
Yeah.
Prestwick had a
Of
lot,
buffering the
Prestwick
neighbors.
proposal had a lot.
Oh,
of-
that was where Prestwick was
Yeah.
looking at? Okay.
Lang Loth did not.
No,
I'm
that
sorry.
took part of Lapham Peak.
There was once upon a time a proposal to turn it basically into Bayshore Mall.
That's right, it was going to be a
Actually, it was
regional mall.
twice the size of Mayfair Mall.
I said Bayshore Mall.
Yeah, but I mean, it was,
okay.
if you figure Mayfair Mall, it was twice that size.
Wow.
Well, that would have taken care of the tax problem in the city.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, for
It's gonna
20
be
years it
vacant
would
too
have.
right now.
For a year, right? Then it'd be
Except for
vacant.
the TIF to run the sewer underneath.
So do you want to include residential, forget about the whole office, what if it all falls apart? What if residential is a future use be,
How are you going to pay for the sewer?
Yeah, I just
Right.
thought I mean,
That's what you
residential
decided
seems
on?
like
Okay.
it's
That
out
takes
of the
out
question.
residential.
I think it comes down to whatever proposal is going to have to accommodate the concerns of citizens with proper buffering and,
what if it was high density condominiums, multifamily?
well, I think that's part of the process of addressing the concerns.
You still would have a sewer issue.
Yeah.
Right, I think that would be harder.
I think that the main issue with this property is, you got prime interstate frontage.
That's the deal.
meant for a corporate office.
Yep.
It just hasn't developed because of the high infrastructure costs that kind of burden the property.
And that's going to be tough. The way I look at it right now is that if I were going to locate my corporate office there, that'd be the first thing I'd ask is what is the offsite cost? And if you tell me it's $1 million sewer pipe, I'd walk away in a second, unless you said, well, wait a minute, let's think about this, maybe we can TIF it. But for one user, or maybe two users, it's not a lot of, maybe three, depending on the size, but
Yeah, but when you start getting into medical and a micro hospital and doctor's clinics and.
That's different,
Yeah,
yeah.
I mean,
But for a corporate office, that'd be a tough sell.
Yeah, that's true. Was it $1 million for the high pressure underneath the, was that $1 million?
yeah.
Oh.
But interestingly, it seems like it's been $1 million for the last 10 years.
EPDM and PVC
Price of
just went up
sewage hasn't gone
quintuple,
up.
so
Yeah.
it's
Okay.
expensive pipe.
So I think for the most part, the direction is to leave this as is, and separately, we're gonna look into the
Right.
associated living component. Okay. The next area is downtown. Do you want to continue tonight, or do you want to start downtown next
I
meeting?
think it's the most important thing we're
Yeah.
going to do, and I think it's a mistake to
Just
start
spend
it
a
at 9
meeting on
o'clock.
it?
Agreed.
Okay, so then the next question is,
Are we handling St. John's and downtown together, or?
yes. So mapping wise, or maybe we could just quick touch on this for a second. Mapping wise, I only did St. John's because I didn't know exactly what the other stickers were for, what areas they were for. And then I do think it's worth spending a little time talking about downtown in general. So most of the stickers relate to St. John's. And then there's some stickers along the river that largely relate to boat access, river walk. There's like 157 also includes high use, high density. 239 includes mixed use, but I don't know if these are for specific properties or if it's an area thing. Because you could talk about expanding the CBD1 area or the CBD2 area or. Yes, and I can do that. And so I intentionally didn't, I didn't think we were going to get this far tonight. I intentionally didn't do it because I don't know what areas to include other than St. John's. So does anyone want to claim like 239? Is it a general statement?
What was the
As
statement
mixed
for
use?
239? Mixed use?
It is mixed. So right now downtown,
I think I put that on there.
Was
That's the
239
building
the liquor
just
store?
north of here,
The old liquor store?
or south of here, yeah.
okay, so it was your intent, 239 is area
Now
south.
it's out, now you know what I thought about it.
Area south of City Hall, right?
Yes,
The
between here
multi-tenant
and the
building?
town bank.
Multi-tenant building?
Looks like 230,
Could we bring up what CBD1 and CBD2 are on a map just so they can see?
Yeah.
so John, that sticker's off a little bit, right? I think it's sitting on top of
Yeah, it's
Main and
hard,
Genesee, right?
yeah, it's hard to pinpoint
Yeah,
right on that
okay.
one without a
A little too far north.
little smaller
Yeah.
sticker next time would be good.
Oh,
Or a
yeah.
bigger map.
Bigger map.
Yeah, the stickers were a little big. So what I can do next time is I can bring in a map that just kind of covers this larger area. Because I'll just tell you.
Right, that's this map.
Yep, yeah, you all have a hard copy of the
Yeah.
zoning map, and you might want to bring it next time, because I have gotten calls in this CBD2 area, which is the darker pink, and stretching into the R3 areas, the brownish, wanting to make some of those lands more dense. So
Is CBD the city business district, is that what that stands for?
CBD1 is the most
Central business district.
lenient, it's the most central and it's the most lenient district. It's really kind of anything goes, except when you do bring in mixed use residential, you need a conditional use. CBD2, there are some standards that apply, and we can go through all of these next time. R6 is a multifamily district. It's somewhat dense. B6 allows residential through a conditional use. And then R3 is single family, two family. There's like R1 downtown and R1. And I want to say that some of these developments that are talked about as being really desirable, I'm just going to say were loosely interpreted. The code was loosely interpreted by the previous planner. And so I just think it's important to understand when you look at other developments and you say, wow, that looks really good, it's not necessarily allowed in today's code. And so the code may be more restrictive than you think, and some of these developments may not have been allowed. But they look great and they're reasonable. So I could bring a couple of those in as an example.
You're saying they were already built?
They're built. What is this one with the planned development right here? What is that
Delafield
Delafield?
Commons.
Delafield Commons. I think Delafield Commons is an example, and then this one off of Bleecker, is that,
Which one?
okay, there's the one on Bleecker.
That's the one we were talking about earlier on Bleecker.
That's not Delafield Commons?
No, the lower one's Delafield Commons, you're at Delafield Woods now.
Okay. I can look at both of those, but I believe if the code is interpreted as its intent, that those might be too dense.
Delafield Commons where the vet clinic is and
No, it's the smaller residential lots, just in from the cemetery.
oh, okay. All right.
It was developed like in 2003, 2004, somewhere in there.
Okay.
So do you want me to kind of make some images of the whole downtown, and we might have a little bit of a broad, we'll start with St. John's, that's what people put their tags on, but then we might have a little bit of a broader discussion. And we can talk about how far we want to get into the lake access, or access to downtown from the lake.
Do you think we're going to have enough time to cover all of this and the voting on the different quadrants?
So I want to talk about that because if you want to vote, I feel like I would need more time to prepare for that, because the next meeting is next week, Tuesday already.
Next week?
And I need to prepare the maps for the downtown area. So our next meeting is June 15th.
Oh, I thought it was a week from today,
Oh, it's a week from today.
or 2 weeks from today.
No,
No,
it's
one
June
week.
15th.
Oh,
We had that extra optional meeting, I forget what day.
So it was June
The
15th,
15th
because
was
we
the optional
canceled
meeting.
one.
Canceled one,
We canceled one, so
canceled.
now it's a permanent meeting.
postponed.
So here's my, do you think we can get through downtown in 2 hours and vote in 1 hour? If not, then we need to hold a second meeting, and then we can carry on next week. But then the last meeting, I would want to push out a little bit.
Remember, you're still gonna go over the cost of services study in more detail.
Yeah, we still have to cover that. I think we're going to need
Something like two
Two
meetings.
meetings,
to
and
make.
then if we wrap up and it's voting time next meeting, we could always stop early and then have that final meeting voting for all the properties.
So are you saying a meeting next Tuesday, then a 2-week gap, and another
Well,
meeting?
So we have to pick a day. I'll be honest, I've got a couple of personal plans coming up.
Would you need 3 weeks, Amy?
So let's do the 15th and talk about downtown, okay? And then I am gone the 16th through the 22nd. So I'll just have a really hard time preparing. And then we've got the 29th, and then we go into the 4th of July. Would it be too long for you to hold off until July 20th? I don't want you to, I don't want it to, for you to lose what we've been discussing, but I'm also gone the 12th through the 11th through the 14th of July. Anyone opposed to July 20th, 6:30 to 9:30? You're all available? We just need to check and make sure the room is available, Tom.
I'm looking at the calendar right now, and it is.
Okay.
Is that a Tuesday?
It
Yep.
is.
Tuesday,
Tuesday, July 20th.
6:30 to 9:30, but we're meeting next week to talk about downtown. I don't think there's any reason why we can't get through the meetings, including that 4th meeting, though. This is our last area to discuss. We should be able to get through it in one meeting.
Let's hope so. Anything else before we wrap up? All right, can I entertain a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
A motion from Jackie, do we have a second?
Second.
Second from Scott. All those in favor, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Thank you, everybody. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Hey, Jackie, can I see your zoning map real quick?